What's good, everyone? This is Vision Harry, and boy do we have a treat for you. Hagrid took Harry to Gringotts before Platform 9, and refused to leave until they ran a full scan. Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Unease on the Water. The storm had been Hagrid's idea. Not literally, he hadn't conjured it, hadn't asked for it, hadn't done anything more magical than knock down the door of a leaning shack on a rock in the middle of the North Sea. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in that place where instinct lived alongside years of accumulated worry, Hagrid had always known that when he finally came for Harry Potter, the world would make noise about it. The sea was making plenty of noise now. Waves crashed against the rock in long, rolling slaps, and the wind threw itself at the walls of the hut with the persistence of something that had a personal grievance. Inside, a fire had been coaxed into existence in a hearth that looked like it hadn't seen use since before Harry was born, and the orange light it threw across the room made everything look slightly warmer than it was. Which wasn't saying much. The hut was one bad gust away from structural failure, the roof had opinions about rain that it was loudly sharing, and the Dursleys had arranged themselves in the back corner in the specific way of people who very much wanted to be anywhere else but lacked the courage to say so. Harry Potter sat on the floor eating a slightly squashed birthday cake and trying not to look like someone whose entire world had just cracked open. He wasn't doing a very good job of it. Hagrid watched him from across the fire, enormous hands wrapped around a cup of tea that would have been a bucket for anyone else. He'd told Harry the important things, the lightning bolt scar, the parents, the name. "You're a wizard, Harry." He'd watched the boy's face go through about 15 different expressions in as many seconds, each one more complicated than the last. Confusion. Disbelief. Something fragile and dangerous that might have been hope. And then, underneath all of it, a look that Hagrid recognized in his bones because he'd seen it before, in creatures that had been caged too long, a kind of bewildered, unsteady blinking, like a thing that had just found the door open and wasn't quite sure yet if it was allowed to walk through. Harry was allowed. That was the whole reason Hagrid was here. But. There was a but, and it had been gnawing at Hagrid since before he'd gotten on his enchanted motorbike, since before he'd left Hogwarts, since, if he was being truly honest with himself, which he tried to be, since that night 10 years ago when he'd taken a sleeping baby from the ruins of a house and flown through a cold night sky and felt, for the entirety of that flight, that something was wrong. He hadn't known what it was then. He'd been too young, too overwhelmed, too much in awe of the fact that Albus Dumbledore had given him a task this important. He'd done what he was told. He'd delivered the boy. But the feeling had never fully gone away. It had sat in his chest like a stone for a decade, small and quiet and easy to ignore when there were hippogriffs to feed and forbidden forest perimeters to walk and all the ordinary urgencies of life at Hogwarts to fill his days. He'd asked himself sometimes, late at night when the wind was right and he could almost hear things in it, whether he'd done Harry Potter a kindness or a harm. Dumbledore said the Dursleys were the only option. Blood protection, he'd said. Ancient magic. The boy will be safer there than anywhere else in the world. And Hagrid believed him, did believe him, because Albus Dumbledore was the greatest wizard alive and had never, in Hagrid's experience, been cavalier about the lives of those in his care. But he'd talked to Daedalus Diggle at the Leaky Cauldron, back in September. Daedalus, who was entirely too delighted about everything and couldn't hold a secret to save his life, had mentioned, just mentioned, in passing, the way he mentioned everything, with enormous excitement and very little awareness of implication, that the vaults at Gringotts had been doing something funny. Estate management, he'd called it. Trusts and things. You know how it is, Hagrid, all very official, very dull. And then he'd gone back to his drink and his delight, and Hagrid had sat with a cold pint and a feeling in his gut that was not entirely unrelated to the stone that had been living there for 10 years. He hadn't done anything about it then. He was doing something about it now. He waited until the Dursley boy was asleep, which didn't take long, because the boy had the constitution of a rather lazy slug and the storm had apparently been very tiring for him, and until Vernon Dursley had gone the color of a raw sausage about 17 different things and then exhausted himself into silence. Petunia Dursley sat very still and very upright in the corner, watching Hagrid with eyes that were equal parts hatred and terror, and Hagrid found he had very little interest in whatever she was thinking. "Harry," he said, quietly. Harry looked up from the cake. He had chocolate on his chin and hadn't noticed, and there was something about that, the chocolate on the chin, the birthday cake on the floor, the boy who'd never had a birthday cake before sitting on a cold floor eating one at midnight, that tightened something in Hagrid's chest until it was nearly unbearable. "Yeah. We're going to Diagon Alley tomorrow. Get your school things." "Right." Harry nodded. Then, carefully, like he was testing how much weight the words would hold, "and Gringotts? To get the money from the vault." "Yeah." Hagrid set down his teacup. "And, before that, before we do anything else, we're gonna talk to the goblins. Not just Abu, the vault. Abu, everything, dot." Harry looked at him. "Everything?" "There's a thing," Hagrid said slowly, choosing his words with the care of a man who was not naturally a careful speaker, called an inheritance scan. "Goblins do, It's, well. It tells ya what's yours. All of it. Not just the gold." He paused. "I shoulda done it sooner. I shoulda done it 10 years ago, if I'm honest with ya, and I wasn't in a position to do that then, but I'm in a position now." He met Harry's eyes, and his voice went lower, more private. "I need ya to trust me on this." Harry was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. The storm threw itself at the walls. "Okay," Harry said. "Just like that. Okay. No questions about why, no demands for explanation, no wariness." He'd known Hagrid for approximately 4 hours and he trusted him completely, and that uncomplicated, unguarded, immediate trust, hit Hagrid somewhere well below his ribcage and made the stone in his chest ache with a new and different weight. What had they done to this boy, that he gave trust away so easily? That he had no practice being careful with it? "Get some sleep," Hagrid said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "We'll be off early." Morning arrived grey and salt-smelling, and Harry was already awake when Hagrid stirred, sitting at the window with his knees pulled up and looking out at the sea in a way that suggested he'd been there for a while. The storm had blown itself out sometime in the small hours, leaving behind a washed-clean sky the color of old pewter and water that caught the early light in flat silver sheets. "You sleep?" Hagrid asked. Harry turned from the window. The lightning bolt scar caught the light for a moment. "Some." Hagrid made him eat, produced from his coat pockets, which operated on entirely different spatial logic than coat pockets had any right to, a packet of sausages, a loaf of bread, and a tin of orange juice, and watched with grim satisfaction as Harry ate 3 sausages and 2 thick slices of bread with the focused, unself-conscious hunger of someone who had not been getting enough food. The Dursleys, to their credit, stayed in the other room and contributed nothing to the morning but the sound of Dudley snoring. They left before anyone thought to make it difficult. The boat that had brought the Dursleys to the rock was still tied at the base of the cliff, and Hagrid folded himself into it with the practiced discomfort of a very large person who was accustomed to fitting into very small spaces. Harry sat at the other end and trailed his fingers in the water, watching the rock hut recede, and didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Hagrid, what kind of things would an inheritance scan find?" Hagrid pulled at the oars. The water was calmer now, just a gentle chop, and the mainland was a grey-green smudge on the horizon that was slowly getting more specific. "Lots of things. What's in your vaults, not just what you've been told is in M, but all of M. Any lordships or titles that come to ya by blood. Any," he paused, rowing. "Any magical blocks or bindings on ya. Any contracts made in your name." Harry took his fingers out of the water. "Contracts made in my name. Without me knowing? It's possible. Especially for a minor. Especially for a minor who's magical guardian." Hagrid stopped talking for a moment. Started again. "It's just best to know. That's all." Harry looked at him for a long second in a way that was uncomfortably perceptive for an 11-year-old. You think something's wrong. I think it's best to know. You already said that. I meant it both times. Harry nodded slowly, looking out at the approaching coastline. Okay, he said again. That word, doing all the work of a much longer conversation. Hagrid found he was extremely grateful for it. The leaky cauldron was exactly as Hagrid had left it, dim and warm and smelling of old wood and butterbeer and decades of accumulated magical residue, which had a smell not entirely unlike autumn leaves and copper pennies. Tom the barman caught Hagrid's eye and then Harry's face and went very still for half a second in the way that people did, the way they always did, before the recognition hit and something complicated moved across their faces. Tom covered it quickly with a wide smile and a welcome, and Harry endured the handshakes and the well-wishing and the slightly overwhelming attention of a pub full of people who all seemed to know exactly who he was with a patience that, Hagrid suspected, had been trained into him over years of learning that emotions were best kept internal. When they finally pushed through into Diagon Alley proper, Harry stopped. He stood on the cobblestones in his too large clothes and his cracked second-hand trainers and he looked up and around at the crooked, colorful, impossible street with every single thing he'd been carefully not feeling for the past 12 hours running completely unguarded across his face. Hagrid, who had grown up with magic, who had walked this street more times than he could count, watched Harry see it for the first time and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized had been wound tight. This is all magic, Harry said. All of it. And I belong here. The question was so quietly asked, so genuinely uncertain, that Hagrid had to turn away for a moment and look at a display of enchanted quills in the nearest window. Yeah, he said, when he trusted his voice. Yeah, do. They walked the length of Diagon Alley at Harry's pace, which was the pace of someone discovering that oxygen existed and wanting to examine every molecule, but Hagrid kept them moving with gentle redirections when Harry stopped for too long at any given window. They had time. They'd have more time. But Gringotts first, and Gringotts before everything else, and Hagrid had made himself a promise on a rock in the middle of the North Sea that he intended to keep. The bank rose at the end of the alley in white marble and goblin indifference, its polished floors and its high ceilings and its columns that were aggressively, architecturally serious about the importance of what went on within its walls. The goblins at the desks were doing what goblins always did, working with precise, unhurried focus, their long fingers moving over ledgers and coins and documents with the efficiency of creatures who had been doing this for longer than most of the buildings in England had been standing. Harry read the poem on the door, "Enter, stranger, but take heed," and his lips moved slightly, like he was memorizing it. Then he looked at Hagrid. They really don't mess about, do they? Not ever, Hagrid agreed. The goblin who met them at the main desk was named Ragnok, middle-aged, by goblin reckoning, which meant he had about 3 centuries of institutional memory and a face that had stopped finding humans surprising somewhere around 1400. He recognized Hagrid with a nod that conveyed professional familiarity and absolutely nothing warmer. I need to see someone an inheritance scan, Hagrid said, without preamble. Full scan. This is Harry Potter. Ragnok looked at Harry with the careful, measuring look of a goblin assessing the precise weight and purity of something valuable. It wasn't unkind. It was simply thorough. Harry looked back at him with the same green-eyed steadiness he'd used on Hagrid in the boat, the look of someone who had learned that the best way to endure being evaluated was to do a bit of evaluating back. A full inheritance scan, Ragnok said, is not a standard service. I know. It requires authorization from the vault holder. He's right here. He is a minor. His magical guardian is, Hagrid stopped. Took a breath. His magical guardian hasn't filed his guardianship officially with Gringotts. Has he? Ragnok looked at Hagrid for a long moment. Something shifted behind the goblin's eyes, not warmth, exactly, but something like the professional acknowledgement of a valid point made correctly. No, Ragnok said. He has not. So the vault is managed by, estate management protocols. The words were precise. Careful. The words of someone who had been saying them without elaborating for 10 years. In the absence of a registered magical guardian, Gringotts administers the Potter vaults under standard minor air protocols. And has anyone ever asked for a full scan? In the last 10 years? Ragnarok said nothing. Which was, Hagrid had learned over years of dealing with goblins, a very specific kind of answer. Harry had been listening to this exchange with the focused quiet of someone who didn't understand all the words but was correctly intuiting the shape of what they meant. Now he looked at Hagrid with those green eyes, his mother's eyes, and said, "What does it mean that no one asked?" "It means," Hagrid said carefully, "that no one wanted to know." The silence that followed that statement was the kind that had weight and texture. Ragnarok looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ragnarok. "I want to know," Harry said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just, certain. The voice of someone who had spent 11 years being told what he didn't get to have, and had just decided, very quietly, to stop being told that. Ragnarok straightened fractionally. "Come with me, Mr. Potter." They didn't take the minecart. Hagrid had been half expecting the minecart. It was how vault trips usually went, the rattling descent into the deep dark, the cold rushing air, the dizzying turns. Instead, Ragnarok led them through a door behind the main hall that Hagrid had never been through before, down a corridor that was wider than the cart tunnels and lit by something that wasn't quite torchlight, a steady blue-white radiance that came from the walls themselves. The corridor was quiet. The sounds of the main hall disappeared almost immediately. Harry walked beside Hagrid and didn't reach for his hand, but he walked close enough that their arms were almost touching, and Hagrid decided that was close enough to the same thing. "How far down are we going?" Harry asked. Ragnarok didn't break stride. "The inheritance chamber is not measured in depth. It is measured in age." A pause. "We are going quite far." The corridor opened eventually into a room that was large enough to feel like a space rather than a room, high-ceilinged, circular, the walls lined with shelves of the kind of objects that didn't have names in English. At the center was a stone basin, roughly hewn, that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Bronze Age excavation. A second goblin was already there, younger, sharper-faced, with quick dark eyes that tracked Harry's entrance with undisguised professional interest. "Griphook," said Ragnarok. "The Potter heir requires a full inheritance scan." Griphook looked at Harry. Then at Ragnarok. Then back at Harry with an expression that, in a goblin, was as close to "well, this will be interesting" as Hagrid had ever seen. "Yes," said Griphook. "I imagine he does." The process was explained with goblin efficiency, Ragnarok describing it in the tone of someone reciting a legal protocol rather than making conversation. A drop of blood in the basin. The stone would read the magical signature, not just the living magic, but the full magical heritage, every claim and every debt and every binding. A full scan would take longer than a standard vault access. It would read everything. Everything, Ragnarok said, with a slight emphasis, that has been done to the blood, as well as the blood itself. Harry listened. Then he took the small silver knife that Griphook offered without being asked, drew it across his thumb with the brisk lack of ceremony of someone who had endured worse than a small cut, and let 3 drops fall into the basin. The stone didn't glow dramatically. It didn't make a sound. It simply absorbed. And then, after a moment, it began to write. Not on paper. On the air above it, in silver script that curled out of the surface of the stone like smoke finding a shape, letters and numbers and symbols that weren't all in any alphabet Hagrid could read. The writing came slowly at first, 1 line, 2 lines, and then faster, and then very fast, and then the silver script was scrolling through the air above the basin in dense, continuous columns, and Griphook had gone very still in a way that Hagrid had never seen a goblin go still before. Not the stillness of boredom or patience. The stillness of a creature that has just seen something it did not expect. Ragnarok moved to stand beside Griphook. He read. His jaw tightened fractionally, which on a goblin face was the equivalent of another creature's sharp intake of breath. Harry watched the scrolling silver words with an expression of careful, steady attention. He couldn't read all of it, the symbols, the embedded legal notation in old gobbledygook, but he could read enough. The names came first: James Charles Potter. Lily Elara Potter, née Evans. His parents' names hanging in the air in letters of silver light, and Harry stood very still and breathed around them. Then the titles. The lordships. The properties. And Hagrid, who was not as educated as he might have been but who knew enough about the old wizarding families to understand what he was reading, felt the blood leave his face. Hagrid, Harry said quietly. Yeah. How many vaults am I supposed to have? Hagrid looked at the silver script. Counted. By my reckoning. 7. I thought I had 1. So did I. Griphook turned from the basin. His expression was doing something complicated that it clearly wasn't used to doing. Mr. Potter, he said, with a precision that somehow managed to convey the gravity of what he was about to say without technically exceeding his professional remit. The inheritance scan has identified several items of significant note. I would like your permission to walk through them with you, in order of, he seemed to consider the word. Urgency. Harry looked at him steadily. Yes. The Potter family vault, Vault 687, which you are aware of, is your trust vault. It was established for your use during your minority and is funded annually from the main Potter vault. He paused. The main Potter vault has not been fully audited in 11 years. During that time, there have been 43 withdrawals made under estate management protocols. 43. Harry said it the same way he'd said I want to know, flat and certain, with a core of something that wasn't quite anger but was its older, quieter cousin. Who made them? The authorization signatures on 17 of them, Griphook said carefully, are consistent with the magical signature of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The name sat in the air. Hagrid felt the world rearrange itself slightly around that fact. He'd suspected, not exactly that, not withdrawals, not that specific thing, but something wrong, something redirected, and the suspension of having suspected without knowing was suddenly replaced by the cold certainty of knowing. And cold certainty was, in Hagrid's experience, considerably worse than suspension. He made withdrawals from my vault, Harry said. From the main Potter estate vault, yes. Under estate management authorization. Can he do that? He could, Griphook said, in the absence of a registered guardian and with no surviving adult heirs to contest the authorization. Under strict interpretations of the Gringotts estate management protocols of 1812, an individual of sufficient magical standing, he paused. It was legal. Technically. Technically, Harry said. What else? Griphook consulted the silver script. The Black Family Vault. Hagrid blinked. Harry's eyes moved to him, a quick question. Sirius Black. Hagrid said. He's in Azkaban. He betrayed your parents, Harry, Sirius Black, Griphook interrupted, with the patience of someone who was about to say something that would require patience to hear, did not name Harry Potter as his heir. His vault and titles were not in question regarding Mr. Black. He looked at the script. However, the Black family tree, as recognized by Gringotts, which recognizes blood and magical lineage above all social and political designations, shows that Harry Potter is the heir of the noble and most ancient house of Black through his mother's lineage. Hagrid stared at him. Through Lily. Lily Evans was, by blood, a great-niece of Doria Black, née Potter, who married Charles Potter. The bloodline connection is, Griphook glanced at the script. Complicated, as the Black family history frequently is, but it is there and it is valid. Gringotts recognizes it. Harry was very quiet. Then, so I'm Lord Black. The heir presumptive of the Black family, yes, in the absence of other living recognized claimants. The title and all associated vaults, properties, and seats are held in probate pending formal claim. No one, Griphook said, with a slight emphasis, has filed a claim in 11 years. No one wanted to know, Harry said softly. It was what Hagrid had said. On the water. 2 hours ago. Hagrid sat down on the floor. He was not generally a floor-sitting person, but his legs had communicated a strong interest in being closer to the ground, and he respected that. He sat down and rested his elbows on his knees and looked at the silver script still unscrolling above the stone basin and tried to arrange what he was feeling into something orderly. He couldn't quite manage it. But he tried. The bindings, Griphook said. He said it in the particular way of someone delivering the part of the news that is, in fact, the worst part. Mr. Potter, the scan has identified 6 distinct magical bindings applied to your core. Harry turned from Hagrid to Griphook. My core. My magic. Your magical core. The seat of your power. 6 bindings have been placed on it, applied at different times, the earliest dating to approximately, he looked at the script. The night of October 31st, 1981. The night my parents died. Yes. And the most recent? Griphook looked at the silver script for a moment without speaking. Then, approximately 3 days after you were placed with the Dursley family. The room was very quiet. The blue-white light from the walls was steady and indifferent. The silver script kept unscrolling, letters and numbers and symbols that together formed the clearest possible picture of a decade of deliberate, carefully constructed, plausibly deniable diminishment. Harry's face was calm. Carefully, deliberately calm, with something working underneath it that Hagrid couldn't fully read. He was 11 years old and he had just been told that someone had reached into his soul, into his magic, the thing that was most fundamentally and irreducibly him, and put locks on it. 6 locks. One of them on the worst night of his life, when he'd been a baby and his parents were dead in the next room and the world was on fire. Can they be removed? Harry asked. Yes. The process requires your consent, your blood, and a Gringotts removal ward. Griphook met his eyes. It is not painless. Okay, Harry said. Not how much will it hurt? Not do I have to. Not can we wait. Just okay, again, the word that was doing the work of a much braver vocabulary. Griphook looked at him for a moment with those dark, quick eyes. Then he said something that Hagrid had never, in 30 years of occasional Gringotts dealings, heard a goblin say unprompted to a human customer. Mr. Potter, Griphook said. The situation you are in, the situation that the scan has revealed, is one that Gringotts takes with significant seriousness. Not because of your identity or your fame. But because what was done to your vaults and to your magical core was done without your knowledge or consent. Gringotts does not permit that. Not for any account holder. Not for any reason. He paused. We will help you. All of it. Hagrid pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed very carefully. Harry nodded. Then, to Hagrid, you knew something was wrong. Suspected, Hagrid said, his voice not quite where he'd left it. Why didn't anyone else look? Hagrid had no answer for that. He had several answers, but none of them were adequate, and some of them were indictments of people he'd trusted entirely his whole life, and he wasn't ready to look directly at those yet. So he said, I'm looking now. Harry looked at him for a long moment with that green-eyed steadiness, and then something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, not the collapsing softness of someone who decided it was safe to feel things, but something more specific. The look of a person deciding that the person across from them is, in fact, on their side. Okay, Harry said, for the 3rd time. And he turned back to Griphook and said, show me everything. They were in the inheritance chamber for 4 hours. 4 hours, and the silver script didn't stop writing until the end of the second, and by the time it went still the air above the basin was so dense with letters that Griphook was navigating through it with practiced ease while Hagrid was simply trying not to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of what Harry Potter had been owed and had not received. The Potter family, it turned out, was older than most people knew. Not just the modern Potter line, James's grandfather and great-grandfather, the dragon hide merchants and the potion innovators, but going back, considerably further back, to a branch of the founding families that had drifted from prominence so many centuries ago that the connection had been largely forgotten. Not by the goblins, who forgot nothing that could be expressed numerically. There were properties. Multiple properties, spread across England and one in Ireland and one on a small island off the coast of Scotland that the scan described as ancestral seat, Potter family, currently unoccupied, maintained by standing ward. There was a seat on the Wisengamot, 2 seats, actually, since the Potter family had acquired a second through the same Doria Black connection that complicated the Black inheritance. There was a library at the Potter main estate, Godric's Hollow having been only a secondary property, that contained items of significant magical and historical value. Harry listened to all of it. He didn't celebrate. He didn't whoop or bounce or express any of the reactions that Hagrid might have expected from a child discovering they were fabulously wealthy. He listened with the careful, analytical attention of someone who was building a map, cross-referencing as he went, asking grip-hook precise, intelligent questions that made the goblin pause occasionally before answering, not because the questions were wrong but because they were remarkably right for an 11-year-old who had been informed of the wizarding world's existence approximately 12 hours ago. Are the blocked funds recoverable? Yes, in most cases, though some would require Wisengamot petition. Who has access to the estate currently? A question Griphook answered carefully, with names that Hagrid recognized and one that he was not surprised to hear and one that he very much wished he hadn't. The bindings on my core, who placed them? Griphook said the scan could identify magical signatures only for the 3 most recent. Harry made note of the 3 signatures Griphook gave him. His face didn't change. He just made note of them, the way you'd note which roads are blocked when planning a route. When Griphook finished walking through the final sections of the scan, the contracts, 2 of them, both concerning Harry's future and both made without his knowledge by people who had legal authority they arguably should not have had over an orphaned minor, Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want the bindings removed today. Griphook nodded. The removal ward is available. And I want, Harry paused. I want to come back. After Hogwarts starts. I want to go through all of this properly. All the vaults, all the properties, the Wisengamot seats. All of it. Gringotts will prepare a full account summary, Griphook said. It will be ready for your return. Harry nodded. Then he looked at Hagrid, and Hagrid noticed, properly, as a discrete fact, that Harry was standing up straighter than he'd been when they walked in. Not performed straightness, not the rigid posture of someone trying to look confident. Just a small, organic shift, as if the act of knowing what he was owed had given something back to his spine. Thank you, Harry said to Griphook. And then, I mean it. Griphook looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, the professional mask shifted infinitesimally, and what was underneath it was something that might, in a human being, have been respect. In a goblin, it was considerably rarer and considerably more valuable. You are welcome, Lord Potter, said Griphook. The title hung in the air of the inheritance chamber. Harry didn't flinch from it and he didn't reach for it, didn't preen or bristle. He just stood with it, the way you stand with a coat you've just been told was always yours. Hagrid got up off the floor. His knees said several unpleasant things about this, which he ignored. Outside, through walls of stone and earth, Diagon Alley was going about its business. People were buying wands and robes and cauldrons and books, doing ordinary extraordinary magical things, living in the world that Harry Potter had been kept from for 11 years. The sun was probably doing something perfectly nice up there through the pewter sky. The stone basin was still, the silver script gone, the air above it empty and quiet. Hagrid, Harry said. Yeah. You said you should have done this 10 years ago. Hagrid looked at him. Yeah. Don't, Harry stopped. Start it again, more carefully. I'm glad you did it now. That's what I wanted to say. The stone in Hagrid's chest, the one that had been there for a decade, didn't go away. But something shifted in it, not dissolution, not relief exactly, but the particular feeling of a weight that is still there but is now, at least, being acknowledged. Being looked at directly. Being given its proper name. "All right," Hagrid said, his voice doing the rough thing again. "Right. Let's go get those bindings off, yeah. Then wands. Robes. The works." He stood up fully and looked down at Harry from his considerable height, and somewhere in the enormity of his face, something that had been knotted since the night of October 31st, 1981 loosened one careful degree. "The whole world's ahead of ya, Harry. All of it. And it's yours." Harry looked up at him. "Yeah," he said. And this time, when he said it, it didn't sound like permission-seeking or tentative hope. It sounded like someone who had decided to believe it. Chapter 2, What the Ledger Says. The removal ward was 3 levels below the inheritance chamber. Griphook led them down a passage that narrowed as it went deeper, the blue-white wall light giving way to something warmer and older, torches in iron brackets that burned without smoke, their flames the deep amber of embers rather than yellow-orange of normal fire. The stone underfoot changed too, from the dressed marble of the upper levels to something rougher and older, flagstones worn smooth by centuries of goblin feet. The whole place felt like it had opinions about humans who came this deep, and those opinions were not especially welcoming, but Harry walked through it without hesitation and Hagrid had to angle his shoulders to fit through a doorframe that had clearly been designed without half-giants in mind. The ward itself was a room stripped of everything decorative. No shelves, no script, no basin. Just stone walls, a low ceiling, a chair in the center that looked like it had been built for function rather than comfort, and runes carved so deeply into the floor around it that the carvings threw shadows even though the light source was directly overhead. A third goblin was waiting, older than Griphook, broader, with hands that looked like they'd spent centuries at work that required precision and force in equal measure. "Barkrock," said Griphook. "He is our ward specialist." Barkrock looked at Harry. "You understand what this is," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Bindings on my magical core," Harry said. 6 of them. I want them removed. It will hurt. You mentioned that. I'm not being polite, Barkrock said. I'm being accurate. The bindings are old. Some of them are layered into the core's growth pattern, they've been there since your magic was still developing. Removing them will feel like, he seemed to search for an analogy. Like setting a broken bone that healed crooked. The bone is not broken now. But it was set wrong. Harry sat down in the chair. How long? An hour. Perhaps more. All right. Hagrid stayed by the wall and did not look away once for the full duration. He would not, afterwards, describe the hour in detail to anyone who asked. Some things were not meant to be described. What he would say, if pressed, was that Harry did not make a sound for the first 20 minutes, and that when sounds eventually came they were not the sounds of someone performing bravery but simply the involuntary sounds of a body processing something it had not been designed to process quietly. That Harry gripped the arms of the chair hard enough that his knuckles went white and then slowly, as the process continued, went back to normal color. That at one point, somewhere around the 40-minute mark, Harry's magic became briefly visible, not in any controlled way, not a spell or a casting, but simply present, radiating off him in a pulse of warm gold-green light that made the runes in the floor flare and made Barkrock step back half a pace with an expression Hagrid had never seen on a goblin before. Something between professional satisfaction and awe. The light lasted about 30 seconds and then settled back into Harry, and Harry breathed out slowly and his grip on the chair relaxed. The last binding is releasing, Barkrock said, his voice carefully neutral. I can feel it, Harry said. His voice was rough at the edges. Good. What happened next was quiet. The runes in the floor dimmed. Barkrock lowered his hands. The torchlight stopped doing the complicated thing it had been doing for the past hour and went back to being ordinary torchlight. Barkrock stood back and assessed Harry with the professional eye of someone checking their own workmanship, looking for anything missed, anything incomplete. Done, he said. Harry sat in the chair for a moment with his eyes closed. Just breathing. Then he opened them, and Hagrid, who was watching his face, saw it, not in a dramatic way, not blazing eyes or crackling air. Just a clarity. As if someone had cleaned a window that had always been slightly obscured, and the view through it was now simply, fundamentally, more. Hagrid, Harry said. Right here. Everything feels louder. He looked at his hands. Is that normal? Barkrock answered before Hagrid could. Your core has been operating at suppressed capacity since you were 15 months old. What you are feeling now is simply normal. For you. He paused. I would estimate, based on the size of the core now that the bindings are clear, that you have been functioning at somewhere between 20 and 30% of your natural magical capacity. Harry looked up from his hands. For my whole life. For the portion of it that we can measure, yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked, Hagrid thought, less like someone who had just been told something devastating and more like someone who had just confirmed something they'd been suspecting without knowing they were suspecting it. All those years at the Dursleys, when things happened that he couldn't explain, when glass broke or hair grew back overnight or he ended up on the school roof, and always the sense, underneath all of it, that there was more that didn't come when he called it, more that slipped away or misfired or simply wasn't there when he needed it. A boy with a 20% throttle on his engine wondering why he couldn't go faster. Thank you, Harry said to Barkrock. Barkrock looked at him for a long moment. You're welcome, he said, with the particular cadence of someone who rarely says those words and means them entirely when he does. They came back up to the inheritance chamber to collect the documents. Griphook had prepared a preliminary summary, thick folded parchment that crinkled with embedded magical notation, which he pressed into Harry's hands with the instruction that the full ledger would be ready within a week and could be collected or old, as Harry preferred. Old is fine, Harry said, and then seemed to catch himself. I'll have an owl. By then. You will need a vault key for the main Potter vault, Griphook said. The trust vault key you already have. He glanced at Hagrid, who produced it from his coat and handed it to Harry. But the main vault has been under estate management lock. Gringotts will generate a new key. It will require your blood signature to use. When? Immediately, if you prefer. Yes. The key that Griphook produced for the main vault was different from the small, worn key of the trust vault, heavier, older looking, with a bow in the shape of a stylized P that caught the torchlight and held it. Harry pressed his thumb against it, the small cut from earlier still fresh enough to serve, and the key hummed once, briefly, and went warm in his hand and then cool again. It's attuned, Griphook said. Only you can use it now. Not even a Gringotts cart runner with authorization can open the vault without that key and your presence. Harry turned the key over in his hand. Looked at it for a moment. Put it in his pocket. The other vaults, he said. The ones in the scan, the Black family vaults and the ancestral ones. How do I claim those formally? The Black family vaults require an heir's declaration before a Gringotts account manager, Griphook said. It is a legal process. It takes time. We would recommend beginning the paperwork today and completing the formal declaration upon your return. What does the declaration involve? A statement of claim, blood verification, and a review of any competing claims. In the case of the Black family, there are. Griphook paused with the air of someone selecting their words with extra care. Potential complications with the current estate, as Sirius Black is living. And in Azkaban, Hagrid said. Azkaban does not constitute death, Griphook said. His claim to the family headship supersedes any heir's claim while he lives. However, the vaults, the ancestral Black vaults tied to the bloodline rather than the individual, those can be accessed by a blood heir regardless of the headship question. He looked at Harry. The amounts involved are not trivial. I don't care about the amounts, Harry said. Griphook blinked. It was a very small blink, but on a goblin it was practically theatrical. Mr. Potter. I care about what's mine, Harry said. Because it's mine. Not because of the amounts. He paused. But start the paperwork. We'll do it properly when I come back. Hagrid, leaning against the wall of the inheritance chamber with his arms folded, thought, Lily. That's her. Something in the way he'd said it, not cold, not mercenary, not greedy, just utterly precise about the distinction between what's mine and how much is mine. Lily Potter had been like that. He hadn't known her well, not the way James had, not the way Dumbledore had, but he'd known enough to know that she was the kind of person who could identify the heart of any question within about 30 seconds and go directly to it without getting distracted by anything else. Harry had her eyes. Apparently he had a bit more than that. There is one additional matter, Griphook said, and his tone shifted in a way that made Hagrid's attention sharpen. The scan identified 2 contracts made in your name. I mentioned them upstairs. I would like to discuss them now, before you leave, because they are, he looked at the folded parchment in Harry's hands. They are significant. Harry sat down on the edge of the stone basin. Not in it, on the rim of it, like it was simply a convenient seat. Hagrid pulled himself off the wall and stood properly, because whatever Griphook was about to say deserved being stood up for. The first contract, Griphook said, is a magical oath of guardianship. It was filed 11 years ago, shortly after you were placed with the Dursley family. The oath names Albus Dumbledore as your de facto magical guardian, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails under wizarding law. He paused. It was filed by Dumbledore himself, and it is technically legal, as there was no surviving adult magical relative to contest it at the time. However, Harry said. The oath includes a clause that is, unusual. A provision that grants the guardian the right to make certain decisions on the ward's behalf relating to magical education, financial management, and, Griphook found the word with obvious precision. Strategic deployment. The room was quiet. Strategic deployment, Harry said slowly. It is not standard language. It is not language that appears in any other guardianship contract in our records. It is, Griphook said, the kind of language that someone very careful and very clever puts into a contract when they want the ability to make significant decisions about a person's life and do not want to be required to justify those decisions to anyone. Hagrid sat down again. The floor came up to meet him with more force than he'd expected. And the second contract? Harry said. His voice was level. Entirely level, like water in a glass being carried very carefully. The second contract, Griphook said, is older. It was made in your name, by your parents, before their deaths, with the best of intentions. It is a life debt contract, binding you to, he checked his notes. The magical community of Britain in the event of certain conditions being met. The prophecy, Harry said. Griphook looked at him with those sharp dark eyes. You know about the prophecy? I know there is one. Harry glanced at Hagrid. I can hear it in the way people talk about me. Nobody says I hope Harry Potter has a nice life. They say things like he'll put it all right. Like I have a job already. A pause. Hagrid told me last night that Voldemort killed my parents and that I'm famous for surviving it. He didn't say anything about a prophecy, but the way he said, Harry stopped. Started again, with careful precision. The way he said "Yell learn a boo," it all in time told me there was more. Hagrid felt something like being caught, and something like being proud, in very uncomfortable proximity to each other. I didn't think it was my place, Hagrid said. I didn't know, it's okay. Harry looked at him without reproach. You knew about the vaults and you brought me here. That was the important part. He turned back to Griphook. What does the contract say, exactly? Griphook spread the relevant section of the parchment on the basin's edge. The contract was old even by Goblin standards, the writing in a slightly different style, the magical notation more formal, the language of an earlier era of wizarding law. James and Lily Potter had made it in 1979, 2 years before Harry was born, when Voldemort's shadow had been long and the Order of the Phoenix had been a desperate measure against desperate times. It was not, Griphook explained, a contract that could be broken. It was a life debt freely offered by two people who had believed, genuinely and with full understanding, that they were making a sacrifice that might save others. The contract had transferred to Harry by inheritance, as all life debts do. What it meant, in practical terms, was that Harry was bound to act when the conditions were met, when the threat that caused the debt was active and present. "It doesn't tell me to sacrifice myself," Harry said, reading the relevant clause with a slight frown. "No. It says act against the threat. To the best of my ability. With whatever means I have available." He looked up. It's not nothing, but it is not a death sentence," Griphook agreed. "It is a binding obligation to try. The nature of the trying is not specified. Because my parents trusted me to figure that out." Griphook looked at him for a moment. "Yes. I believe that is correct." Harry folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into the document stack he was holding. He did it with the deliberateness of someone who was choosing to treat a difficult thing as a manageable thing, which was, Hagrid thought, about the most functional possible response to being 11 years old and discovering you have a contractual obligation to fight a dark wizard. "All right," Harry said. "The guardianship contract, can it be contested?" "You cannot break it while you are a minor," Griphook said. "However, you can limit it. The strategic deployment clause can be formally challenged at Gringotts on the grounds that it constitutes an unusual and disproportionate restriction on a minor heir's autonomy. If you file that challenge, the clause is suspended pending review, and any decisions made under it during the period of suspension are, a very small pause. Under examination. Any decisions made under it," Harry said. "Including the withdrawals." "Including the withdrawals." Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, somewhere deep in the earth, the bank continued to do what banks do, counting, managing, moving wealth through channels that most of the world above the surface never saw. A distant rumble that might have been a mine cart or might have been the earth itself shifting slightly, the way old things do. "File the challenge," Harry said. Griphook nodded once. "It will be filed today. You will need to sign the challenge document." He produced a form that had clearly already been partially prepared, which told Hagrid something interesting about exactly how much Griphook had anticipated this conversation going in this direction. Harry signed. His signature was childish, the letters slightly uneven, and it was the most incongruous thing in the room, this small, child signature on a document of enormous legal weight. But the ink dried with a flash of gold, which meant the magic recognized it, which meant it was valid regardless of how the letters looked. "One more thing," Harry said, when Griphook rolled the document up. "The withdrawals. The ones made under estate management protocols. All 43 of them. I want a full accounting. Where the money went. What it was used for. Everything." Griphook's eyes were steady. "That is your right as vault holder." "I know. I'm exercising it. It will take time to compile. A week, perhaps 2. "Fine. Add it to the ledger." Harry paused. "And Griphook, I want it in writing. The full scan results, the bindings, the contracts, the withdrawal records. Everything we found today. Documented, certified, sealed by Gringotts. I want an official record." Griphook looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the second time in an hour, he said something that went slightly beyond professional protocol: "An official Gringotts record cannot be tampered with by anyone outside these walls. Once sealed, it stands as legal testimony in any wizarding court." "I know," Harry said. "You knew that already." "I guessed it. From what you said earlier about goblin records." Harry met his eyes. "I need things documented because right now all I have is information. I need it to be evidence." The distinction between those two words landed in the room with the weight of something much older than 11 years of experience. Hagrid pressed his hand against his mouth again and looked at the carved runes in the floor and breathed carefully. Griphook inclined his head. "Just slightly. But for a goblin, slightly was plenty. "We will have everything prepared," he said. "Come back in 2 weeks, Lord Potter. Bring identification. We will have your full ledger, the certified scanned documents, the withdrawal accounting, and the preliminary black inheritance paperwork." "I'll be at Hogwarts by then," Harry said. "Can I owl?" "Gringotts receives owl post," Griphook said. "Address it to me." Harry nodded. Then he stood up off the basin rim and tucked the preliminary documents under his arm, and Hagrid heaved himself up off the floor for the second time that morning, and the three of them went back up through the passage toward the light. Back in the main hall of Gringotts, the ordinary business of the bank was ongoing, and the contrast with the stillness of the rooms below was immediate and almost disorienting. Goblins at ledgers, coins being counted, a family arguing quietly over exchange rates, 2 wizards in expensive robes waiting with the impatience of people who felt their time was valuable. Everything very normal and very loud and very much happening at the surface of things, which was, Hagrid reflected, a fairly apt metaphor for what the morning had been. Harry stopped at the main doors and looked back at the hall once, as if fixing it in his memory. Then he looked at Hagrid. "Thank you," he said. "For this. For insisting." Hagrid shook his head. "Should have been done years ago. Maybe. But it wasn't, and you did it today, and that's—" Harry seemed to search for the right word and then simply not find it. "That's everything," he said instead. Hagrid nodded, not trusting his voice. They stepped out into Diagon Alley, and the sunlight hit them, and the street was alive around them, noise and color and magic happening casually in every direction the way it always did here, the way Harry had never seen until this morning. It was still early enough that the crowd was light, the shopkeepers just opening their awnings and setting out their displays, and the alley felt fresh in the particular way of mornings that don't know yet what they're going to become. Harry took a breath of it. "Let it out." "Wand first," he said. Hagrid blinked. "I was thinking robes first, actually, Madame Malkin's is closer. Wand first," Harry said again, and there was something in his voice that was not quite impatient and not quite urgent but was very, very decided. "Ollivanders." Hagrid looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled, genuinely, properly, the smile that used up most of his face. "Wand first," he agreed. They walked the length of the alley together, Hagrid's enormous stride shortened to match Harry's pace, and the morning went on around them without knowing what had happened underground. The shopkeepers nodded at Hagrid, smiled at Harry, a few of them doing the double take of recognition that Harry was getting better at absorbing without flinching. Someone called out Harry Potter. From a distance with the tone of someone identifying a celebrity, and Harry raised a hand in acknowledgement without breaking stride, without performing anything. That was different from how it had been at the Leaky Cauldron, Hagrid noticed. 40 minutes and one complete dismantling of everything he thought he was, and Harry was already carrying it differently. Ollivanders was exactly as it always had been, narrow, dusty, stacked floor to ceiling with wand boxes in that slightly precarious way that somehow never resolved into actual catastrophe. The place smelled of sawdust and cedar and something electrical, like the air before a storm. Mr. Ollivander materialized from between shelves in the particular way he had, which managed to be both expected and startling simultaneously. "Harry Potter," he said. "Mr. Ollivander," Harry said. Ollivander looked at him over the top of the stack of boxes he was carrying. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." He set the boxes down and peered at Harry with those pale, lamp-like eyes that Hagrid always found slightly unsettling. "Your father, holly and mahogany, 11 inches, excellent for transfiguration. Your mother, willow, 10 1/4, very swishy, excellent for charms." He tilted his head. "The scar, of course. And the eyes." "Yes." He straightened up. "Let's see what we find." The process, Hagrid knew, was normally a moderately long one, trial and error, wand after wand, Ollivander working through combinations of wood and core with the systematic methodology of someone running an experiment. For James it had taken 20 minutes. For Lily, apparently, nearly 40, because Ollivander had had opinions about Willow that he'd wanted to explore fully. For Harry, it took about 4 minutes. Not because Ollivander found the right one immediately. He tried 3 wands, and each one produced nothing more than the slight tingle of incompatibility, but because on the 4th, something happened that was not on the standard spectrum of wand-finding experiences that Hagrid had witnessed. Harry took the 4th wand, Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, nice and supple, Ollivander said, and the wand didn't produce sparks or a warm breeze or a shower of colored light the way wands often did for their true match. Instead, every wand box within 3 feet of Harry rose an inch off its shelf simultaneously. Then settled back. Then a warm pulse of gold-green light rolled outward from Harry's hand, exactly the color of what Hagrid had seen in the removal ward, and moved through the shop like a wave, hitting the shelves and the dust on the shelves and making the ancient boxes hum briefly with sympathetic resonance before fading. Ollivander was very still. "Curious," he said, after a moment. His voice had gone to that specific register that meant he was working very hard to treat something extraordinary as professionally interesting rather than alarming. "Very curious indeed." "Good curious or bad curious?" Harry asked, looking at the wand in his hand. He was holding it loosely, naturally, and it was warm in his palm, visibly warm, a thread of gold running up the grain of the holly wood. "Remarkable curious," Ollivander said. He stepped closer and looked at the wand in Harry's hand with the focused intensity of a jeweler examining a stone he's just discovered is much larger than the setting he'd prepared for it. "The wand, it's adapting. The core is," he reached out and stopped just short of touching it. "The phoenix that gave this feather gave only one other. Just one. You may have heard who that other belongs to." Harry looked up. "Voldemort." Ollivander flinched, which most people did. Harry said the name the way you'd say weather or Tuesday, factual, unstressed, present. "Yes," said Ollivander, collecting himself with visible effort. "Tom Riddle. And now I find that the brother wand's match is," he looked at Harry's unbound magic still faintly visible in the warm thread along the wand's grain. "Considerably more than I anticipated." He stepped back. "That will be 7 galleons, Mr. Potter." Harry reached into the money pouch Hagrid had retrieved for him from the trust vault, which now contained a considerably larger amount than Hagrid had originally intended to withdraw, because after the morning's revelations Hagrid had made a private, firm, non-negotiable decision that Harry Potter was going to have enough money for everything he needed and then some, and paid without ceremony. "Thank you," Harry said to Ollivander, pocketing the wand in his too large Dursley jeans with a sense of rightness that was almost visible. Ollivander watched him go. When Harry was almost at the door, Ollivander said, "Mr. Potter." Harry turned. "The wand chooses the wizard," Ollivander said. "That is always true. But occasionally, very occasionally, the wizard is also what the wand has been waiting for. The core knows things, you understand. Things about potential. About what someone will become." A pause. "I find I am very curious about what you will become." Harry looked at him for a moment. "So am I," he said, and walked out. Hagrid followed, ducking the doorframe, and when he came out into the sunlight Harry was standing on the cobblestones looking down the length of Diagon Alley with the wand in his hand, turning it over once, then putting it away. "Robes?" Harry said. "Robes," Hagrid agreed. Madame Malkin's was busy, 3 other children being fitted, 2 sets of anxious parents, a harassed assistant with pins floating around her head, and Madame Malkin herself, a short, round woman who moved with the efficiency of someone who had measured thousands of children and found the whole exercise professionally satisfying, beckoned Harry onto a stool with the ease of long practice. It was at the fittings that they encountered the first one. A boy about Harry's age on the adjacent stool, pale and sharp-faced, dressed in clothes that were already expensive, being attended to by Madame Malkin personally while his mother, blonde, very well dressed, wearing the specific expression of someone who considers most environments slightly beneath her, watched from a chair. The boy glanced at Harry with the automatic assessment of someone who had been raised to categorize people quickly. His eyes moved over Harry's clothes first, the too large shirt, the worn jeans, the trainers that had seen better years. Something shifted in the boy's expression that was clearly in the habit of being contempt. Then his eyes moved to Harry's face. And then to the scar. The contempt did something complicated. Hogwarts, the boy said. Yes, Harry said, standing still while Madame Malkin's measuring tape did things around his arms. Me too. First year. The boy straightened slightly, an automatic, trained straightening. Draco Malfoy. Harry looked at him for a moment. Harry Potter. The name landed, as it always did here. Draco Malfoy's eyes widened fractionally before he brought them back under control, and the complicated thing in his expression got more complicated. The mother in the chair made a small sound. I know who you are, Draco said. Everyone knows who you are. Yes, Harry agreed. My father says you'll be in Gryffindor. The Potters always are. There was something in his voice that was performing casualness over an actual interest. He says Dumbledore will make sure of it. Harry said nothing for a moment. Just let Madame Malkin work, looking mildly ahead. What house are you hoping for? Harry asked eventually. Slytherin, of course. All our family, all the right families, are Slytherin. Gryffindors are. Draco seemed to be selecting an adjective from several available options. Loud. Gryffindors meant to be brave, Harry said, not defensively. Conversationally. Brave, Draco said, with the careful disdain of a 10-year-old boy who has had opinions about Gryffindor drilled into him since birth but is also, clearly, curious in a way he hasn't quite accounted for. That's what they say. What it means is they act without thinking. He paused. Slytherin thinks first. I can see the appeal of that, Harry said. Draco looked at him sideways, recalibrating something. You're not what I expected, he said, after a moment. What did you expect? A pause. Someone who acted like it was all very overwhelming. People do, when they find out they're magical. Especially ones who didn't know. Another sidelong look. You knew. About magic? I found out yesterday, Harry said. Draco blinked. Yesterday. And I've had a fairly informative morning. Hagrid, watching from near the door, made a sound that might have been a laugh that he caught at the last second and redirected into a cough. Draco Malfoy's mother, Narcissa, had gone very still in her chair, watching Harry Potter with the sharp, careful eyes of a woman who was very good at reading rooms and had just walked into one she hadn't expected. She said nothing. But she didn't look away. Well, Draco said, with the slightly thrown quality of someone whose script has been gently removed from his hands. I suppose we'll see, at the sorting. I suppose we will, Harry agreed. Madame Malkin pronounced Harry done, and he stepped off the stool and collected the receipt for his school robes with the same unhurried manner he'd brought to every transaction today. He looked at Draco once more, a look that was genuinely assessing, not hostile, not performing anything, just actually looking. Malfoy, he said. A nod. Potter, Draco said back. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't anything with a name yet. But it wasn't what it should have been either, not the clean, uncomplicated rejection it had been in the original version of this moment, the version where Harry Potter arrived uncertain and Draco Malfoy arrived superior. There was something in it that was more like two people recognizing that they would have to figure each other out, which was a much more complicated and interesting problem. Harry walked to Hagrid's side, and they left. The rest of the afternoon moved through Flourish and Blotts, the apothecary, Elop's Owl Emporium, where Harry stood for a long time in front of a snowy owl who stared at him with the focused attention of a creature that has made a decision and is waiting for the world to catch up with it, and then simply said her, with the quiet certainty he'd been bringing to everything today, and Hagrid paid for her without being asked because there was no world in which Harry Potter did not leave this shop. With that particular owl. They were sitting in the ice cream parlor as the afternoon got long and golden, and Harry was working through a bowl of something that involved 3 flavors and a drizzle of something butterscotch adjacent, when he said, without preamble, Dumbledore's going to know. Hagrid, who had been staring into his own enormous bowl of ice cream with the air of a man engaged in internal debate, looked up. What? That we came here today. That I got the scan. That I filed the challenge against the guardianship clause. Harry ate a spoonful of ice cream with the focused calm that was, Hagrid was coming to understand, simply how Harry processed large things. Gringotts can't tell him, they can't, right? The records are private. Goblin records are sealed, Hagrid said carefully. They don't report to anyone outside the bank. But he'll know something changed. He'll be able to feel it, maybe. The bindings are gone. Harry looked at his ice cream. He knew they were there. He had to. Hagrid opened his mouth. Closed it. He wanted, badly, to say something that wasn't true, some comfortable deflection, some maybe or we don't know for certain. He'd been saying those things to himself for a decade and they hadn't made the stone in his chest any lighter. Yeah, he said. He probably did. Harry nodded. Not upset. Just confirming the map. What are you going to do? Hagrid asked. Harry looked at him. The evening light was coming through the parlor window and catching the green of his eyes and the lightning bolt on his forehead, and he looked, not frightening, not hard, not anything that was the wrong kind of thing. Just awake. Just fully, clearly awake, in a way that Hagrid thought he probably hadn't been before this morning, with 6 locks on the part of him that understood the world most clearly. I'm going to Hogwarts, Harry said. I'm going to learn. I'm going to be very good at everything they teach me. He paused. And I'm going to pay attention. To what? To everything, Harry said. That's what you do when you don't know who's on your side. You pay attention until you do know. Hagrid sat with that for a moment. There are people on your side, he said. Not everyone is, I want you to know that. There are people who genuinely, Harry, I know, Harry said. You're one of them. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way you'd state a thing you were certain about. I know that. That's not what I'm worried about. What are ya worried about? Harry thought about it. The owl, Hedwig, he'd already named her, from a book he'd apparently read at some point despite the Dursleys' best efforts, rustled in her cage on the seat beside him. The ice cream parlor hummed around them, warm and ordinary, children and parents and the sweet smell of a summer afternoon. I'm worried, Harry said, about the things I don't know yet. He paused. That's the only kind of worry that makes sense, really. Everything else you can look up. Hagrid looked at him for a long time. You're going to be all right, he said. Harry picked up his spoon. I know, he said, and ate the rest of his ice cream, and outside the window Diagon Alley moved through its golden afternoon and the world had absolutely no idea what it had just put in motion. Chapter 3, The Lordship Rings. The Owl arrived on a Tuesday. Harry had been at the Dursleys for 11 days since Diagon Alley, which was 11 days longer than he'd wanted to be there, but Hagrid had explained that there was no getting around it. Hogwarts started September 1st, the Hogwarts Express left at 11, and there was nothing to be done about the intervening fortnight except endure it and wait. Harry had nodded and filed that away alongside everything else he'd filed away in the last 2 weeks, which was quite a lot. He'd spent the fortnight differently than he'd spent any other fortnight of his life. The Dursleys had tried, in the first 3 days, to return to the ordinary rhythms of his pre-birthday existence, the cupboard, the chores, the particular atmosphere of managed contempt that the household ran on. What they found was that Harry was not available for that anymore in any practical sense. Not aggressive about it, not confrontational in the way that would have given Vernon Dursley something to grab onto and escalate. Just unavailable. He did the chores that were reasonable and stopped doing the ones that weren't, without comment or argument, with the simple equanimity of someone who had made a private decision and wasn't especially interested in discussing it. Vernon had gone purple about it twice and Harry had looked at him with those green eyes until Vernon had found something else to be angry about. Petunia watched him differently. Petunia had always been the more dangerous of the two in Harry's private assessment, because she was sharp where Vernon was loud, and she watched Harry now with the careful attention of someone revising a calculation. She didn't push. She kept Dudley away from Harry's new room. He'd moved himself into the small spare bedroom with the air of someone who had checked whether the move was contestable and found that it wasn't, and she cooked his meals without comment and didn't meet his eyes. That was fine. Harry didn't need her eyes. What he needed was time, and the Dursleys were inadvertently providing it in the form of being extremely motivated to leave him alone. He read his school books cover to cover and then started again from the beginning, this time with a quill and a sheet of Muggle notebook paper, making notes in the margins. He learned the names of the Hogwarts professors from a history of Hogwarts that wasn't technically on the first-year list but had been sitting in a pile of additional purchases Hagrid had made with the quiet determination of a man overcompensating. He read Magical Law and You, a Witch or Wizard's Guide to Their Rights twice, the second time with his Gringotts documents spread beside him on the floor, cross-referencing. He was doing exactly that, sitting on the floor of his small room with Hedwig watching him from her perch on the windowsill and 3 different documents open simultaneously, when the owl came. Not Hedwig. A Gringotts owl, which was a different animal in every sense, a large tawny bird with the no-nonsense bearing of institutional employment, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper and sealed with wax that bore the Gringotts crest. It landed on Harry's windowsill beside Hedwig with the air of an owl that had been given a delivery address and had executed the delivery and expected to be done with it, and it waited while Harry unwrapped the package with careful hands. The full ledger. It was thicker than he'd expected, which was saying something because he'd expected it to be thick. Bound in dark leather, sealed with a clasp that opened at his touch and no one else's, he could feel the blood magic in it, warm and responsive, and inside, in Griphook's precise goblin script, everything. The complete Potter family financial history. The vaults and their contents. The properties. The Wizengamot seats. The certified documentation of the 6 bindings and their magical signatures. The full accounting of 43 withdrawals. Harry sat on the floor and read it for 3 hours straight. Hedwig watched him. The Gringotts owl, having delivered its parcel, left. When Harry finished the last page and closed the ledger, he sat for a while in the quiet of the small room, and the evening light came through the window and lay across the floor in long orange strips, and Harry looked at what he knew now versus what he had known 2 weeks ago and conducted an honest assessment of the distance between those 2 points. The 43 withdrawals. 17 signed by Dumbledore, as Griphook had said. The remaining 26 distributed across 2 other signatures, one he recognized because Griphook had identified it in the removal ward, belonging to a man currently sitting on the Wizengamot who had apparently been authorized as a secondary estate manager, a role that did not appear anywhere in the guardianship contract and had no clear legal basis. The other signature was less clear, partially obscured by a notation that said authorized under sealed ministry protocol, which was itself a phrase that made Harry feel a very specific way that he decided was most accurately described as interested. The amounts were not ruinous. That was important to note. The Potter vaults were substantial enough that 43 withdrawals over 10 years, even significant ones, had not depleted them to anything approaching concerning levels. What they had depleted was something else. Something the ledger couldn't quite quantify but that Harry could feel in the spaces between the numbers, reading between the careful goblin accounting. They had been removing things. Not just gold. Items listed in the Potter family inventory that appeared in the 1981 post-death accounting and did not appear in the current inventory. Books from the Ancestral Library. Objects from the Godric's Hollow secondary property before it was made a monument. A few items whose descriptions in the inventory were written in terms that were clearly deliberately vague. What someone had decided Harry Potter didn't need to have. He reached for his quill, pulled a clean sheet of parchment from his school supplies pile, and began making a list. Not of grievances, not exactly. A list of questions. Each item that had been removed was a question: where is it now? Who authorized the removal? What is its magical function? He worked methodically through the inventory discrepancies, and the list grew, and the room got darker as the evening progressed, and Harry lit the small lamp on the dresser and kept writing. At the bottom of the ledger, beneath the main text, there was a separate section in a different hand, not griphooks, but similarly precise, with a heading that read, Lordship Entitlements, Pending Claim. Below it, a list. The Potter family seat on the Wizengamot, 1 vote, 1 voice, available upon formal claim by the recognized heir on his 17th birthday or earlier with Wizengamot approval. The secondary seat, through the Doria Black connection, same terms. The Black family headship, complicated by serious Black situation but not unresolvable. The ancestral properties and their associated magical seats, some of which had Wizengamot connection through older family lines that Harry was only beginning to understand. And at the very bottom of the list, in slightly larger text, underlined once, Lordship rings held in trust by Gringotts pending heir's claim. Rings will present upon blood recognition. Note, rings carry magical oaths of house leadership. Claimant should be aware that the rings carry binding obligations as well as privileges. Harry read that last line twice. Then he closed the ledger, changed into his pajamas, and went to sleep. The night before September 1st, Harry packed his trunk with the organized efficiency of someone who had packed it and unpacked it twice already in order to get everything in the right place. Hedwig's cage sat beside it. The Gringotts documents were in a charmed inner pocket of his school robes. Griphook had included with the ledger a small brass key to a pocket ward, a strip of spelled leather that attached inside a robe's breast pocket and could not be accessed by anyone but its owner. It was, Griphook's accompanying note said, standard for clients of significant means. Harry had sewn it into place with Petunia's sewing kit, which she had lent him without comment. He slept well, which surprised him. He'd expected to be awake, turning things over. But the thinking was done, for now, and his body, apparently, had decided it was owed a good night's sleep and was going to take it. In the morning he came downstairs to find a cooked breakfast on the table and Petunia standing at the sink with her back to him, and no sign of Vernon or Dudley, which was unusual enough that he paused in the doorway for a moment. "Vernon's taken Dudley to his mother's for the day," Petunia said, without turning around. "I thought it would be easier." Harry sat down. "Thank you," he said, meaning it in a way that was slightly complicated but genuinely present. Petunia was quiet. The tap ran. Then she turned it off and turned around, and she looked older in the morning light than she usually did, or perhaps Harry was looking at her more honestly than he usually allowed himself to. Her face was thin and sharp and held something that was not quite guilt and not quite grief but occupied the same general territory. "There's a car outside at 9, she said. "To take you to King's Cross." Harry looked at her. "You called a cab?" "Yes." A pause. "You could have just, I can manage, I called a cab," Petunia said, with the finality of a woman closing a subject. She sat down across from him, which she had never done at breakfast, not once in 10 years of shared breakfasts. She didn't say anything else for a moment. Just sat. "Petunia," Harry said. She looked at him. He used her name so rarely, it was always Aunt Petunia or nothing at all, that it seemed to catch her slightly off guard. "I'm not angry at you," Harry said. He said it plainly, the same way he said everything now. "I know things were, I know it wasn't easy for you. Having me. I know what it cost." A pause. "I'm not angry." Petunia looked at him for a long moment. Her lips pressed together. Something moved across her face that she was clearly not going to give words to, but that Harry, watching, could read well enough. "Eat your breakfast," she said. "You'll miss your train." Harry ate his breakfast. King's Cross was the noise and rush of a Tuesday morning commute, suits and briefcases, announcements on the speaker system, trolleys and rolling bags and the specific mild chaos of a place that handles enormous numbers of people by making everyone slightly inconvenient to everyone else. Harry moved through it with his trunk on a trolley and Hedwig's cage balanced on top, navigating by instinct toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. He found it without difficulty, the apparently solid brick wall that he walked toward with the specific combination of confidence and mild spatial commitment that the books had described, and the barrier dissolved around him with the familiar almost pressure of a magical threshold, and then he was standing on platform 9 3/4 with the Hogwarts Express billowing cheerful steam ahead of him in the September morning, and the platform was full of families and owls and children. And the accumulated magical energy of several hundred people going somewhere they were excited about. Harry stood for a moment and took it in. He had been doing that a lot lately, stopping for a moment and taking things in, really looking at them, as if to make up for the 11 years of not being allowed to look at things properly. Hagrid had noticed it in Diagon Alley. He did it now, on the platform, a quick complete survey of the space, the train, the crowd, the families clustered together in ways that made it immediately obvious which children were going back and which were going for the first time, the sharp-eyed older students who'd stopped being impressed by any of it, the first years who very much had not. He started moving toward the train. Oi! Fred! No, the cage, give it here. A large family, red-haired and loud and thoroughly entangled in each other's luggage, occupied a substantial portion of the platform ahead of him. A woman with a wide, practical face and the specific energy of someone running a military operation disguised as a family outing was directing traffic with competent urgency. Twins who were clearly twins, same height, same grin, same manner of moving through the world as if they'd been planning something since approximately birth, were engaged in something with a cage that their mother was trying to intercept. A tall boy with a prefect badge, dark hair, was pulling his own trunk toward the train with practiced calm. And on the periphery, slightly separate from the family cluster, a younger boy with red hair and a slightly battered robe was looking at the train with an expression that Harry recognized immediately because it was his own from every shop window in Diagon Alley, the look of someone standing at the edge of the place they'd been waiting for their whole life. Harry pushed his trolley alongside him. First year. The boy turned. Freckled, open-faced, with an ink stain on his left hand and the particular honest eyes of someone who hadn't yet learned to be careful with how he looked at people. Yeah. Ron Weasley. Then, catching himself. Sorry, that was, you probably don't care about my name, Harry Potter. He offered his hand. Ron Weasley's eyes went to the scar with the speed of someone who couldn't stop them, and then back to Harry's face with the equally fast speed of someone who immediately wished they hadn't done that. Right. Yeah. Obviously. He shook Harry's hand. Sorry. It's fine, Harry said. Everyone does it. It's rude though, Ron said, with the genuine regret of someone who had manners drilled into him by a mother who took manners seriously. The staring. It's fine, Harry said again. Then, is that your family? Yeah. All of them. Well, the ones who are still in school. Bill and Charlie are already working, Percy just started his 6th year, he's got the badge, and Fred and George are starting their 4th and I'm, yeah. First. He said first the way a person says the word when they are the youngest of 6 siblings who have all done the thing before them, with a quality of wanting very much to be doing the thing itself and slightly less excited about being the one who comes last. I'm first year too, Harry said. Yeah, I know, I mean, Ron caught himself. Sorry, everyone knows who you are. I know. Harry looked at the train. What house do you think you'll be in? Gryffindor, Ron said immediately, and there was something wistful in the immediacy of it. My whole family's Gryffindor. All of them. He paused. I suppose it'd be a bit odd if I wasn't. Harry looked at him. Do you want to be in Gryffindor? Ron blinked. Yeah. Course. Good. Harry started moving his trolley toward the train. Come on. We can find a compartment together if you want. Ron looked slightly surprised by the logistics of how quickly that had resolved, then grabbed his trolley and followed. They were loading Hedwig's cage and Harry's trunk into the overhead rack when the compartment door opened and a girl looked in, bushy brown hair, slightly out of breath, carrying a book that she'd been reading while walking and had only just put away. She assessed the compartment, assessed them, and said, Is there room? Everywhere else is nearly full. Yes, Harry said, which made Ron shuffle sideways on his seat with the automatic good manners of a well-raised family boy. She sat down, smoothed her robes, and said, "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the school books already. Have you?" She looked at Harry first, the kind of direct eye contact that dared you to be unimpressed, and then at Ron. "I've read them," Harry said. Hermione's eyebrows went up in a way that was not expecting that answer. "All of them? Cover to cover?" "Twice." He thought for a moment. "I found Magical Theory of the 15th Century harder going than the others." "It's the translator," Hermione said immediately, her voice picking up the particular velocity of someone who has been waiting to have this conversation. "The original Latin is much clearer." "Did you know there's a version, in the restricted section?" Harry said. "Yes, I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating in real time. Then she smiled, a genuine, pleased smile, not the careful social performance of someone who was used to being the smartest person in a room and had learned to manage that. Just actual delight at finding someone who had done the reading. Ron looked between them. "I've read some of them," he offered. "Which ones?" Hermione asked. Ron considered. The charms one was all right. The train began to move. It slid out of King's Cross in a cloud of steam and a long, musical whistle, and the platform fell away behind them, and London began to happen outside the window in long grey and green strips, and Harry watched it go with a feeling in his chest that wasn't quite excitement and wasn't quite relief but occupied the same space as both. He was going. He was actually going. The thing that had been waiting for him, the thing that had always been waiting for him, was now approximately 7 hours north on a moving train. He was also, quietly, still thinking about the ledger. They were somewhere past Birmingham, the landscape having given way to proper countryside, when Harry said, "Hermione, how much do you know about Wiesengemot procedure?" Hermione had been in the middle of explaining something about wand-weight theory to Ron, who was listening with the engaged attention of someone who found the topic genuinely interesting while also being slightly distracted by the food trolley situation he'd been tracking through the compartment window. She stopped. "Quite a lot, actually. I read Modern Magical Law and the abridged Wiesengemot Standing Orders." "The abridged version?" "The full standing orders are 1,200 pages and not available from Flourish and Blots," she said. "I've written to the ministry for the full version but it hadn't arrived yet." A pause. "Why?" Harry was quiet for a moment, making a private assessment. Then he pulled the Gringotts documents from the charmed pocket in his robe, the preliminary summary, the letter from Griphook, the first pass ledger notation, and set them on the seat between them. Hermione looked at them. Ron leaned over. "What is this?" Hermione said. "An inheritance scan," Harry said. "I had it done at Gringotts, before term started." He paused. "I'm going to tell you both something, and I want you to know that you don't have to do anything about it. Your first years and it's not your problem. But I'm going to need people around me at Hogwarts who know what's actually going on, rather than what they've been told is going on, and I can't find those people without telling them some of it." Ron had stopped looking at the food trolley. He was looking at Harry with those straightforward, honest eyes. "Tell us," he said simply. The exact same simplicity with which Harry had said okay to Hagrid on the water, and it produced the same effect, a small release of tension somewhere below Harry's sternum. So Harry told them. Not everything. Not the full accounting, not the names, not the specifics that were still too sharp-edged to hand to people he'd known for 3 hours. But the shape of it, the bindings on his core, the vaults, the guardianship contract and its unusual clause, the withdrawals. He told it plainly, without drama, the way you'd describe a map to someone who was going to be navigating alongside you. Hermione was quiet for the full duration. Ron's expression moved through several stages, surprise, then anger, then the careful settling back of someone choosing to think rather than react. When Harry finished, Hermione said, "The guardianship clause. You said strategic deployment. That language, in the abridged standing orders, there's a section on proxy rights for magical wards. A guardian with that kind of clause could theoretically, she stopped. Started again. Could theoretically make decisions about what role you play in a conflict. Whether you're put in danger. Whether you're given information about threats or kept ignorant of them. Yes, Harry said. And Dumbledore filed that contract himself, she said. Yes. Hermione pressed her lips together. She was clearly running through implications at high speed, cross-referencing things she'd read, building a model. He's the headmaster, she said, half to herself. And your magical guardian. And the most powerful wizard in Britain. Those three things together, it's a lot of concentrated authority over one 11-year-old boy, Harry said. It's an extraordinary amount. She looked at him. You filed the challenge. The day of the scan. Good. She straightened slightly. The challenge will limit the clause but not the guardianship itself. You said you can't break the guardianship until you're of age. Or until I find grounds to contest the guardianship entirely. There would have to be a demonstrable harm, Hermione said immediately. Or a conflict of interest. The Wizengamot would need to see. She looked at the documents again. The withdrawal records. If Gringotts certifies them, they already have, Harry said. It's in the full ledger. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. The countryside flew past the window. Somewhere down the train a boy was laughing very loudly at something. You planned this, she said. Not accusingly. Just noting it. I planned for it to be useful, Harry said. I don't know yet exactly how. But I know that the difference between having documented evidence and having a story that you tell people is very large. That's very, she paused, looking for the word. That's a very strategic way of thinking. Slytherins think first, Harry said, echoing Draco Malfoy from the fitting. Ron made a face. Please don't sort into Slytherin. I don't intend to. Harry looked at him. But being strategic about things doesn't make you Slytherin. It just makes you someone who's paying attention. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, my brothers never explained it like that. Your brothers were probably never in this situation. Harry looked at the documents, then carefully folded them back into the charmed pocket. I'm not asking you to fight anyone for me. I'm not asking you to do anything, honestly. I wanted two people to know. People I picked, not people who were assigned to me. Ron met his eyes. Something happened in Ron's expression, the thing where a decision gets made, not announced, just made, and it settles in someone's posture. Well, Ron said. You picked well. Harry looked at him. Then, for the first time that day, the first time in a while, actually, since Hagrid's enormous delighted face in the ice cream parlor, he smiled. Not performed, not careful. Just a smile. The food trolley came by, and Ron straightened immediately with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for this. Harry bought enough for all three of them, which made Hermione start to protest about not needing him to, and Harry just handed her a chocolate frog and she accepted it and they all ate lunch while the countryside became hills and the hills became something wilder and grander, and outside the window Scotland began to make itself known on the horizon. The castle arrived at night, as it was supposed to. Harry had read the description in Hogwarts, a history, but reading a description of Hogwarts and seeing it were not, it turned out, experiences that had much overlap. It was simply enormous, in the way that things from a different age are enormous, built at a scale that was not concerned with whether human beings felt comfortable in its shadow. Towers and battlements and hundreds of lit windows, reflected in the black lake that spread beneath it, and the whole thing charged with a magic so old and so thoroughly embedded in the stone that Harry felt it like a change in air pressure as the boats crossed the water. A deepening. A presence. Beside him, Ron was looking up at it with his mouth slightly open. Hermione had her hands folded tightly in her lap and was very carefully not clutching anything, which was her version of the same feeling. Harry looked at the castle and felt something that took him a moment to identify because he hadn't felt it very often. He felt like he was arriving somewhere. Not visiting. Not passing through. Arriving. Like a thing coming to rest in the space it was made for. Hagrid was there with the boats, enormous in the darkness, calling no more than 4 to a boat. With the professional energy of someone who had done this a great many times and genuinely loved every one of them. He caught Harry's eye across the water and something passed between them, a quick thing, private, acknowledgement of the 2 weeks since Gringotts and all the distance travelled since. Then Hagrid looked away to manage the boats, and Harry's boat pushed off from the shore, and the castle grew as they crossed toward it. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall, tall, spare, with a tartan trimmed to her robes and an expression of precise authority that Harry liked immediately. She explained the sorting with the efficient seriousness of someone for whom the ceremony was important and time was finite, and the first years stood in their cluster and tried to look less nervous than they were. Harry was not nervous. He was paying attention, which was different. He was watching McGonagall, who was watching all of them in the way of a teacher doing a first assessment. He was watching the hall through the closed doors, not visible, but audible, the distant hum of several hundred people seated and waiting. He was watching Draco Malfoy, 3 people to his right, who was doing the same kind of watching Harry was, in a slightly different register, more performance in it, more awareness of being observed, but underneath that, genuine assessment. Their eyes met once, briefly. Neither acknowledged it. He was watching the ghosts who drifted through, which several of the first years startled quite dramatically at. Harry observed them with interest. One in particular, a ghost in Elizabethan ruff and an expression of somewhat mournful dignity, caught Harry's eye and said, in a pleasantly conversational tone, "First time, I take it?" Harry nodded. "It gets less overwhelming," the ghost offered. "After the first century or so." Then it drifted on. Ron, beside Harry, stared at the space the ghost had occupied. "Did it just, yes," Harry said. "Right," said Ron. The doors opened. The great hall was, enormous was inadequate as a word, which Hogwarts seemed to consistently make inadequate. For long tables in the house colors, a staff table at the end, and above all of it a ceiling that was the night sky, not painted like it but actually the night sky, clear and star-sharp and infinite overhead. The candles floating between the tables threw light upward into it and the effect was of sitting in the open air under the stars, except warmer, and with considerably more silverware. Harry walked down the center of the room and felt 400 pairs of eyes on him and kept his own eyes on the ceiling for a moment, just a moment, to establish that it was his choice whether to look at the crowd or not. Then he brought his eyes level and looked at the staff table. He recognized Dumbledore immediately from the wizard photographs that appeared in the history books. Long white beard, half-moon spectacles, robes of deep blue. The kind of face that had been described so many times and in such consistently admiring terms that there was a specific effort required to look at it clearly, without the weight of its reputation. Harry made that effort. Looked at the face itself, not the reputation. Saw, intelligence, obvious and genuine. A capacity for warmth visible in the set of the mouth. A habit of observation. Dumbledore's eyes had moved to Harry the moment he entered the hall, and they had not moved away. Steady. Watching. The eyes of a man who has been doing very complicated long-term calculations for a very long time. Harry held the look for a count of 3, easy and direct, and then looked at the sorting hat. Dumbledore's expression, in those 3 seconds, had done something small and specific. Not surprise, exactly. More like the careful recalibration of a man who has just found that a variable in his equation has changed without his knowledge, and is now running the new numbers. Harry looked at the sorting hat and thought, I know what I want. The process went alphabetically and Harry waited, watching his new classmates get sorted with the patient attention he'd been bringing to everything. The hat took varying times with everyone, quick decisive shouts for some, longer silent conversations for others. Hermione was sorted into Gryffindor with a speed that suggested the hat had made its decision before she sat down. Ron got Gryffindor after about 20 seconds of what looked, from the outside, like the hat taking a meaningful pause before committing. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall did what it had been doing all evening whenever the name was called, which was go slightly quieter and slightly more attentive. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and felt the hat drop over his head and plunge him into the particular private dark of the hat's interior. Well, well. The voice was dry and old and occupied the inside of his skull in a way that was startling the first second and then completely comfortable. You're an interesting one, aren't you? I can see everything, you know. Can't hide anything from me. I know, Harry thought. I wasn't planning to. A pause. No, you weren't, were you? The hat seemed to be moving through things quickly, efficiently, but with genuine engagement rather than the rote performance of a thing that had been sorted too many people to care. There's quite a lot here. The courage is there, obviously, Gryffindor levels of it, significant, and I don't say that casually. But there's more than that. Quite a bit more. Another pause. You've been thinking strategically. Planning. Building for the long term. The ambition's there, clearly defined, and the intelligence to execute it. I know what I am, Harry thought. I'm not confused about that. I know what I want and I know how to go after it. I'm not asking you to sort me into anything I'm not. And what are you? I'm someone who pays attention, Harry thought. And I'm someone who, when I find out the rules have been broken, changes the rules. The hat was quiet for a moment. Ah, it said. Yes. That's very clearly, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry lifted the hat off his head and set it carefully on the stool and stood up, and the hall was loud with applause, and he walked to the Gryffindor table through it with the same quality he'd walked through every other space today, without performance, without excessive ease, just present and steady and fully himself. He sat down next to Ron, who was thumping the table enthusiastically. Hermione was applauding with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy had been sorted a few spots earlier and was watching Harry's walk to the table with an expression that Harry couldn't fully read from this distance but filed away carefully. And at the staff table, Dumbledore was watching Harry. Clapping, yes. Smiling, yes. The warmth in his face entirely present and not performed. But his eyes were doing the calculation again. Harry looked at him, for the second time that evening, and let the look carry nothing except the simple acknowledgement of two people who were both aware they had things to discuss. Dumbledore's smile stayed exactly the same. Harry looked away first, not because he had to, not because the look was uncomfortable, but because the food had arrived and he was genuinely hungry and there would be time for Albus Dumbledore. There was, in fact, going to be quite a lot of time. After the feast, when the prefects were herding first years toward the staircases and everyone was loud and exhausted and full, Harry felt a warmth at his right hand. Not warmth from the fire, not warmth from a person. Something specific, directed, localized to his palm. He opened his hand and looked down. There was a ring on the little finger of his right hand. He had not put it there. It was gold, old gold, the warm red gold of something that had been made before gold became uniform, with a crest set in the flat of the band. A shield, quartered. The Potter family crest, which he'd seen in the ledger's frontispiece. It had simply appeared. Settled onto his finger the way the wand had settled into his palm, with the wordless certainty of a thing that had found the place it belonged. A lordship ring. He looked at his left hand. On the little finger there, also newly present, also golden, also warm, but different in character, the crest more complex, more ancient, the Black family ring. Smaller than the Potter one, more worn, as if it had moved through a great many hands over a great many centuries. Both rings sat quietly on his fingers and did nothing dramatic. They simply were there, warm and present, the way rights and titles were present when they were finally claimed, not suddenly powerful, not suddenly transforming, but settled. Recognized. Real. Ron, beside him, noticed. His eyes went to the rings and then to Harry's face. Are those, he started. Yes, Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. Around them the crowd moved and surged and someone was arguing with a portrait about a password. Percy Weasley was directing people with his prefect badge and his new authority. Hermione was already asking someone a question about the staircases. Both? Ron said. Both, Harry confirmed. Ron looked at them for another moment. Then he nodded, the same kind of nod as on the train, the decision-made nod. All right, he said. Then let's go find our dormitory. They went up the stairs together, and the rings were warm on Harry's hands, and somewhere in the castle the portraits watched them go, and the old stones held their peace, and Hogwarts did what Hogwarts always did with the people it received, it waited, patient and enormous and very old, to see what they would become within its walls. In his study on the 7th floor, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk after the feast was done and held a quill he wasn't writing with, and looked at nothing in particular. He had expected this year to proceed in a certain way. He had, in fact, spent 11 years ensuring that it would proceed in a certain way. The shape of what was coming, the trials, the gradual education, the careful calibration of courage and ignorance in the right proportions, he had held it in his mind the way you hold a complex piece of music, knowing every part, every movement, every carefully orchestrated swell and resolution. The boy who had walked into the great hall tonight was not the boy he had been building the music for. Not hostile. Not angry. Not, and this was important, Dumbledore thought, turning the quill slowly, not aware of himself as a problem to be solved, which was usually how children who had been told difficult things arrived, shaky with the enormity of what they'd learned. This boy had arrived with the quiet completeness of someone who had already done the learning and was now here for the next part. Which meant someone had given him time to learn. Which meant someone had changed the schedule. Dumbledore set the quill down and looked at Fawkes, who was watching him from the perch with the inscrutable golden eyes of a creature that experienced time differently from everyone else. He had help, Dumbledore said, to Fawkes or to himself. Fawkes made no sound. I wonder, Dumbledore said quietly, what exactly Rubeus found when he went to collect him. The fire crackled. The castle settled around him, stone and magic and centuries of accumulated purpose. And in the Gryffindor dormitory 7 floors below, Harry Potter lay in his 4-poster bed and felt the rings on his fingers, warm and constant, and looked at the ceiling of his first real room and thought about what came next. Chapter 4, The Letter. Dumbledore never expected the first week of Hogwarts had a texture to it. Harry noticed this the way he noticed most things now, not as something happening to him but as something he was moving through deliberately, cataloguing as he went. The texture of the first week was, loud in the mornings, dense with new information in the afternoons, quieter in the evenings when the common room settled into homework and low conversation and the fire did the work of making everything feel temporarily manageable. It smelled of old wood and parchment and the particular chalk and copper smell of classrooms where magic happened regularly. The staircases moved without warning. The portraits gave opinions that nobody had asked for. The ceiling of the great hall tracked the weather with fidelity that Harry found he liked, the way the sky was just there above the food and the conversation, honest about what it was doing. He paid attention to all of it. He paid attention to Professor Flitwick, who was small and precise and lit up visibly when anyone demonstrated genuine understanding, the kind of teacher who had not lost the original enthusiasm for his subject under the accumulated weight of years of teaching it. He paid attention to Professor Sprout, who ran her herbology greenhouse with the cheerful, soil-stained pragmatism of someone who trusted plants more than politics and probably had the right of it. He paid attention to Professor Quirrell, who taught defense against the dark arts with a stutter and a turban and an anxiety that felt slightly constructed in a way Harry couldn't yet articulate but noted carefully. And he paid attention to Professor Snape. Snape taught potions in the dungeons with the focused theatrical authority of a man who had decided that intimidation was a pedagogical tool and had been using it for long enough that he'd stopped noticing how much of his professional identity had built up around it. He moved between the tables with a black billow that was clearly deliberate, speaking in a voice that was soft enough to require silence to hear and cutting enough to make that silence feel necessary. He was, Harry could tell within 10 minutes, genuinely brilliant at his subject. He was also, very clearly, waiting for Harry. The waiting was visible. The careful control of a man who had prepared what he was going to do with this particular student and was managing the timing of it. Harry let him have the timing. "Potter," Snape said, stopping at Harry's table on the third circuit of the dungeon. His voice had the particular quality of someone selecting a demonstration object. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The class went quiet in the specific way of people watching someone else absorb something they're glad isn't aimed at them. Harry looked up from his notes. He had been writing notes, real ones, not performative ones, a diagram of the potion bases from the assigned reading with cross-references to the properties of each ingredient and a question he'd wanted to ask about substitution of wormwood in warm climates. He set his quill down. "Draught of Living Death," he said. "It's one of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The name comes from the alchemical tradition. The combination produces a suspension of vital functions that appears indistinguishable from death to any non-magical examination." Snape looked at him. The expected response to a Snape ambush, Harry had gathered from the body language around him, was flustered ignorance or defensive scrambling. The response Snape had gotten was a complete and precise answer delivered in the tone of someone who had genuinely found the topic interesting when they read about it. "And where," Snape said, his voice doing a careful recalibration, "would you look if I asked you to find a bezoar?" "The stomach of a goat. It acts as an antidote to most poisons, not all." The text was specific about that. "The exceptions include several compounds derived from, the difference," Snape said, cutting across him smoothly, "between monkshood and wolfsbane." "There isn't one," Harry said. "They're the same plant. Aconitum. The name varies by region and tradition." He paused. "The more interesting question is the difference between the prepared root and the processed flower, which have substantially different applications despite coming from the same plant." "The root suppresses, that will do," Snape said. The dungeon was very quiet. Snape looked at Harry with eyes that were doing a great deal of rapid processing behind their surface stillness. Harry looked back at him with the same straightforward attention he'd been giving everyone. The ambush had not gone as planned. Snape knew it. The class knew it. Harry wasn't performing the knowledge, wasn't showing off, wasn't looking around to make sure people were impressed, which made it worse, from a certain perspective, because there was nothing to criticize. He'd just answered the questions correctly and precisely and with genuine engagement, and that was, frankly, harder to respond to than showing off would have been. Snape moved away and said nothing else directly to Harry for the rest of the lesson. After class, on the stairs going up from the dungeons, Ron said, quietly, "How did you know all that?" "I read the textbook," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a step. "I read the textbook. Did you make notes?" A pause. "No. Try it with notes," Harry said. "Not copying, actual questions. Things you want to know that the book doesn't quite answer. It makes you read it differently." Ron considered this with the open, practical honesty of someone trying a new technique rather than defending the old one. "All right," he said. Hermione, on Harry's other side, said nothing, but Harry noticed she wrote something small in the margin of the book she was already carrying, which was her version of the same response. The letter went out on a Wednesday, 6 days into term. Harry had been working on it for 3 days, not continuously, not dramatically, just picking it up in the evenings when the common room was quiet and his dormitory mates were asleep and the fire was low and the castle was the particular version of still that very large, very old buildings achieve after midnight. He wrote it the same way he'd read the Gringotts ledger and his school books, carefully, with notes, with cross-referencing to the magical law text that Hermione had lent him on the grounds that she'd finished it twice and it wasn't doing anything on her shelf. Not one letter. 4 letters. The first was to Gringotts, addressed to Griphook personally, formally invoking his rights as Lord Potter to request a full accounting of the Potter family seat on the Wisengamot and the associated voting rights, and confirming his intention to present formally as a Wisengamot seat holder at the earliest available session. He had looked up the procedure in magical law and confirmed it in the additional text Hermione had lent him. A lord of a recognized ancient family could present at the Wisengamot at any age, though they could not vote until 17 unless specific circumstances obtained. What they could do at any age was be recognized, formally on the record, formally seated, formally undeniable. He was going to be formally undeniable. The second letter was to the Ministry of Magic, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Wizarding Family Records Division. It was, on the surface, a simple inquiry, a request for the official records pertaining to the Potter family estate management protocols currently active with the ministry, as was a vault holder's right under Gringotts estate management protocols of 1812. Politely worded. Legally grounded. Signed Harry James Potter, Lord Potter, heir of the noble House of Black. The titles were not aggressive. They were just accurate. But accuracy, in the right places, was its own form of force. The third letter was to a solicitor. He'd found the name in Magical Law and You. The text had a section on legal representation for wizarding minors that mentioned, in passing, a firm called Goldwater and Brine that specialized in estate law and had a historical relationship with Gringotts that predated most current ministry departments. He'd written to Griphook asking for a recommendation in his first Gringotts letter, but that would take time to come back, so he'd written to Goldwater and Brine directly, outlined his situation in precise and documented terms, and asked whether they took on minor clients whose situation involved potential conflicts with their court-appointed guardian. He expected the answer to be yes. He had enclosed a copy of the certified Gringotts scan summary to demonstrate that the situation was not theoretical. The fourth letter was the one he'd spent the most time on. It was addressed to Albus Dumbledore. It was not angry. It was not accusatory. It was written in the careful, measured register of someone who had thought very hard about what they wanted the letter to accomplish and had made all the strategic decisions about tone and content before they put the first word on the page. Harry had written 6 drafts of it, the first 2 were too aggressive, the third was too conciliatory, the fourth got the balance roughly right, the fifth refined it, and the sixth was the one he sealed. It said, in essence, I have had an inheritance scan conducted at Gringotts. I am aware of the current status of the Potter family vaults, the guardianship contract and its unusual provisions, and the existence of certain bindings that have been removed. I am not writing to accuse anyone of anything. I am writing to let you know that I know, and that I intend to be informed about my own life going forward, and that I would like to meet at your convenience to discuss how we proceed from here. It said this in approximately 3 paragraphs of polished, courteous prose. And it was signed, Harry James Potter, Lord Potter, heir of the noble and most ancient House of Black, first year, Gryffindor House, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The titles after his name were not a threat. They were a statement of fact. But the statement of fact meant, I know exactly what I am. I know exactly what I'm owed. And I am asking you, politely, to meet me as that person rather than as the boy you intended me to be. He sent all 4 letters on Wednesday morning before breakfast, handing them to Hedwig one by one in the Ollery while the early autumn mist was still on the grounds and the other owls were sleeping. Hedwig took each letter with the serious purposefulness of an owl who understood the weight of correspondence, and Harry watched her go until she was a white speck in the grey morning. Then he went to breakfast. The response from Dumbledore came Friday. Not an owl, Harry had half expected an owl, the way responses usually came. Instead, Friday afternoon, a small folded square of parchment appeared on Harry's pillow when he came up to the dormitory after charms, which meant Dumbledore had access to his dormitory, which was itself interesting information. Harry picked it up and read it. Dear Harry, thank you for your letter. I confess it was not the letter I expected, which I suspect you know. I would very much like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. My office, Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, if that suits. I find I am very curious to know you better. With great affection and some small amount of admiration, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Not for information, the information was simple, but for texture. The some small amount of admiration was doing interesting work. It was an acknowledgement, a very careful one, that the letter had surprised him, without admitting what the surprise had been. It was a very skilled piece of correspondence. The great affection was genuine, Harry thought, He didn't get the sense Dumbledore was performing warmth, not exactly, but that the warmth and the calculation existed simultaneously in him the way they could in someone who had genuinely decided that ends justified means and also genuinely cared about the people he was using as means. That was, Harry reflected, the most complicated kind of person. He wrote back, "Saturday at 10 works perfectly. Thank you, sir." Signed it with his name and no titles. The titles were for official correspondence. For this, he just needed to be Harry. Ron was playing chess with Seamus Finnegan in the common room when Harry came down. Ron played chess the way he seemed to do most things, with an instinctive tactical sense that he hadn't yet learned to fully trust, which meant he played well but inconsistently. Seamus was good-natured about losing and better at it than he expected to be. Dean Thomas was drawing something in a large sketchpad that was clearly Quidditch-related. Neville Longbottom was at the table near the window attempting the herbology homework with an expression of determined hopefulness. Harry dropped into the armchair near Ron and watched the chess game for a moment. "Dumbledore wants to see me Saturday," he said. Ron moved a knight without looking up. "Yeah. Responded to my letter." Ron did look up then. His eyes were quick and assessing in the way that Harry was coming to recognize as Ron doing actual strategic thinking under the surface of his casual manner. "How was it?" The response. "Careful," Harry said. "He's careful." He paused. "He's not going to be easy to talk to." "He's Dumbledore," Ron said, as if that covered it. "That's the problem," Harry said. "Everyone thinks that's enough of a description. He's Dumbledore, therefore he's right, therefore trust him completely. But he's also a person who made specific decisions about specific things that affected my life in specific ways, and being Dumbledore doesn't change what those decisions were." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he moved his bishop and said, "My mum thinks he's brilliant. Dad too, basically. Everyone at home, it's like asking about Merlin. You sort of assume that whatever he's done, he had a good reason." "Maybe he did," Harry said. "I'm going to find out." Hermione arrived from upstairs with 3 books under her arm and immediately clocked the conversation from the look on both their faces. Dumbledore responded. "Saturday morning." She sat down and pulled open the top book, Advanced Theory of Magical Contracts, which was very much not on any Hogwarts reading list and which she had either brought from home or sourced through the Hogwarts library in the first 6 days of term, and Harry genuinely wasn't sure which was more likely. You need to establish, very early in that conversation, that you're not asking for permission. You're informing him. "I know," Harry said. "Because there's a version of that conversation where he handles it very graciously and very warmly and you walk out of his office having told him everything and agreed to several things that sound reasonable in the moment and are actually just the original plan with slightly different framing." "I know," Harry said. "He's had a very long time to be good at conversations," Hermione said. "I know, Hermione." She looked at him. Then she nodded, satisfied that he'd thought about it, and went back to her book. Ron moved his queen and said, to Seamus, "Checkmate." Seamus looked at the board and said several things that made Neville look up from the herbology homework with an expression of mild shock. Saturday morning was overcast and cool, the grounds the color of dark tea, and Harry went up the moving staircases to the 7th floor with his hands in his pockets and the Potter ring warm on his right hand and Hedwig's breakfast in his stomach and the full, awake, paying attention quality that had been with him since Gringotts. The gargoyle guarding Dumbledore's office said Sherbet Lemon was the password before Harry even asked, which meant Dumbledore had told it to expect him, which meant Dumbledore had wanted him to feel welcomed rather than interrogated. Harry noted that and stepped onto the revolving staircase. The office was circular and full and immediately impressive in the specific way of spaces that have been inhabited by a single very powerful personality for a very long time. Portraits of previous headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls, most of them asleep, a few watching with the not quite subtle attention of people pretending to be asleep. Fawkes sat on his perch, vivid as something imagined, and when Harry came in the Phoenix looked at him with those gold eyes and made a single, low musical note that wasn't quite a song and wasn't quite a call, something between greeting and assessment. Good morning, Harry, Dumbledore said, from behind his desk. He was dressed in deep purple robes today, his half-moon glasses at the end of his nose, hands folded on the desk in the manner of someone who has thought carefully about their body language. The desk between them had no parchment on it. No quill, no inkpot. It was very deliberately cleared, which was the physical signal of I am fully present for this conversation and not distracted by anything else. Harry appreciated the craft of it and sat down. Good morning, sir. Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses. Those blue eyes, sharp and warm simultaneously, doing the thing they clearly always did, reading, assessing, cataloguing. Harry let them read and catalogued in return. I have read your letter several times, Dumbledore said. Which is more than I say for most of my correspondence. A small smile. You write well. Thank you. You write precisely, which is a related but distinct quality. He tilted his head slightly. I find myself wondering who helped you. With the writing, or with the thinking behind it? The slight smile remained. Both, I suppose. The writing is your own, I can tell that. The argument is well constructed enough that I suspect it's also your own. But the specific knowledge, the inheritance scan, the guardianship protocols, someone pointed you toward that. Hagrid brought me to Gringotts before anything else, Harry said. Before Diagon Alley, before the school supplies. He asked for a full inheritance scan. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Rubius, he said, softly, and there was something in the way he said it that was not angry, not even close to angry, but was the careful, measured quality of someone revising an understanding they'd held for a long time. I see. He was worried, Harry said. About me. He'd been worried for a while. He said he should have done it 10 years ago. Yes, Dumbledore said. I imagine he would say that. A pause. And what did you find, at Gringotts? Harry looked at him steadily. You know what I found. A silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. I expect I do. It was, Harry thought, the most important moment of the conversation, the moment where everything could have gone sideways, where Dumbledore could have shifted the ground, deployed the enormous reserves of warmth and authority and misdirection available to him, led the conversation somewhere else. Instead he'd said yes, I expect I do, which was the choice to be, at minimum, honest about the existence of what Harry knew even if he wasn't going to be expansive about it. Harry respected that. He didn't entirely trust it, but he respected it. I'm not here to accuse you of anything, Harry said. The same opening as the letter. I meant that when I wrote it. I know you did, Dumbledore said. That's one of the things I found most interesting about your letter. But I am here to tell you that I know what I know, Harry continued. The vaults, the guardianship contract, the bindings on my core. He let that last one sit in the air for a moment, not weaponized, just present. I know all of it is documented. I know Gringotts has certified records. And I know that I've filed a legal challenge to the strategic deployment clause in the guardianship contract. Dumbledore looked at him. Not flinching, not defensive. Just looking. The clause, Dumbledore said carefully, was intended to, I know what it was intended to do, Harry said. I'm not asking you to justify it right now. I'm telling you that it's been challenged and that whatever it was intended to do, it won't do it through that mechanism anymore. A long pause. The fire crackled. One of the sleeping portraits made a sound that might have been a snore. You are 11 years old, Dumbledore said, and there was something genuine in it, not dismissive, not wielded as a weapon. More like a man noting a fact about a situation that he found remarkable. Yes, Harry said. And in the last 3 weeks, you have had 6 magical bindings removed from your core, challenged a guardianship contract in Gringotts, written to the Ministry's Records Division, retained the services of a solicitor. You know about the solicitor, Harry said, not surprised. I know about most things that happen in the wizarding world that involve me, Dumbledore said, with a quiet dryness that was the first genuinely unguarded moment of the conversation. Goldwater and brine have a good reputation. I thought so. Harry. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. The warmth in his face did something, deepened, became more specific, became the warmth of a man trying to close the distance between the conversation they were having and the conversation he wanted to have. I want you to understand something. Everything I have done, everything, has been done with your well-being in mind. With the well-being of the wizarding world in mind. There are things at stake here that are larger than any one person's comfort, or privacy, or, sir, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. I know about the prophecy, Harry said. I know there is one. I don't know exactly what it says yet, but I know it exists and I know it concerns me and Voldemort. He watched Dumbledore absorb the uncapitalized name without flinching. And I want to say something about that. A pause. Go on. I don't resent the prophecy, Harry said. I don't resent that I'm connected to it. I have a contract, my parents made it, a life debt, and I honor that. I'm not trying to run from it. He leaned forward slightly, matching Dumbledore's posture. But there is a very large difference between me choosing to face something because I understand it and because it matters to me, and me being aimed at something like a weapon that someone else is pointing. Dumbledore was very still. The bindings on my core, Harry said. The strategic deployment clause. The redirected funds. Those were all about keeping me manageable. Right? Small enough, and ignorant enough, and grateful enough, that when the time came I'd do what was needed without asking too many questions. He paused. I understand why you thought that was necessary. I genuinely do. You've been fighting this war longer than I've been alive and you've made decisions that worked and decisions that cost you and you've learned that people who know too much sometimes, break under the weight of it. He let the silence breathe for a moment. But you were wrong about me, Harry said. Not because I'm special. Because you were treating me like a variable in an equation instead of the person the equation was about. And the difference matters. It matters a lot. Dumbledore sat back. He looked, Harry thought, not like a man being confronted and not like a man being accused and not quite like a man being defeated. He looked like a man hearing something he had known for a long time and had been very carefully not knowing, and the act of it being said out loud in a clear and measured voice by an 11-year-old boy was doing something to the architecture of that not knowing. You are, Dumbledore said, quietly, remarkably like your mother. People keep saying that, Harry said. A ghost of a smile. They're right. He was quiet for a moment, and the portraits watched, and Fawkes made another low musical sound. I will not pretend, Dumbledore said, that I don't have reservations about all of this. The speed of it. What you've set in motion. He met Harry's eyes. There are people who, when they learn what you know, will react badly. Not all of them are on Voldemort's side. Some of them are people who are nominally on ours but who have investments, financial, political, in the way things currently are. I know, Harry said. And Voldemort is not gone, Dumbledore said. Not truly. He is diminished and formless but he is present, and when he knows that the boy who survived him has grown up with full access to his power and his legacy he stopped. Rather than being easily guided, Harry said. A pause. Yes. Then that changes his strategy, Harry said. Not mine. He stood up, which was the decision that the conversation had reached its natural endpoint, and he made it clearly enough that it wasn't a breach of manners. I wanted to tell you myself. Before the legal correspondence reaches you officially. Because I'm not trying to be your enemy, sir. Dumbledore looked up at him from the desk. No, he said. You're trying to be yourself. Yes, Harry said. That, Dumbledore said, and his voice carried something complicated, admiration, and sorrow, and the very specific quality of someone looking at a consequence they set in motion 30 years ago that has arrived at their door having grown considerably beyond what they planned. That is perhaps the most powerful thing you could have told me. Harry picked up his cloak from the back of the chair. I'd like to keep meeting with you regularly, if you're willing. I want to understand more about Voldemort, about the prophecy, about the war. I want to learn from you, genuinely. He paused. But as your student, and eventually as your ally. Not as your instrument. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. I think I'd like that too. Harry nodded. Saturday mornings, if that works. A slight raise of an eyebrow, the merest flicker of amusement. You're scheduling me. 10 o'clock, Harry said. Same time as today. He left. He was halfway down the revolving staircase when Fawkes sang. Not the complicated, full-throated Phoenix song that people described when they talked about Fawkes performing, the sweeping, defiant music that made you feel braver than you were. Just a single clear note, projected down the stairwell, warm and precise, lasting about 3 seconds. Harry stopped on the stairs and looked back up at the closed office door. Then he kept going. He found Ron on the grounds, attempting charms practice in the autumn air with mixed results, and Hermione sitting nearby with a book open on her knee, occasionally telling Ron what he was doing wrong with the particular patience of someone who has explained something twice and is now allowing the other person to learn through trial and error. How was it? Ron asked immediately. Harry sat down on the grass beside them and looked at the grey-green grounds and the castle rising above them and felt, for a moment, the full weight of what was in motion. The ministry letters were out. The solicitor had the documents. The challenge was filed. Dumbledore knew that he knew, and had acknowledged it, and had agreed to regular meetings. All of it moving forward. He's not a villain, Harry said. Ron looked like he'd been expecting something more dramatic. Right. He's a man who decided that my life was a reasonable cost, Harry said. And he's intelligent enough and powerful enough and has been doing it long enough that he genuinely convinced himself it was the only option. Not malicious. Convinced. He paused. That's harder to deal with than malicious. Hermione looked up from her book. Harder how? Because malicious you can just fight, Harry said. Convinced you have to, argue with. Demonstrate to. Make see something differently than he's been seeing it for 60 years. He looked at the castle. He's brilliant. He's genuinely on the right side of most things. He wants Voldemort destroyed as much as I do, maybe more. He's just wrong about the method. And the method is you, Ron said. The method is me, Harry agreed. A pause. An owl crossed the sky above them, heading toward the Ollery, and they watched it go. For what it's worth, Ron said, I think you handled it right. How do you know? Because you came back and sat on the grass, Ron said. If you'd handled it wrong you'd have come back and paced. He shrugged. I have 6 siblings. I know what pacing means. Harry looked at him. Then he looked at the sky again, and the castle, and the grounds, and the specific quality of morning light on the Scottish hills that was like nothing he'd ever seen from his small window at the Dursleys. Tell me something, he said. Okay, said Ron. What do you actually know about Quidditch? Ron's face underwent a complete transformation. I was hoping, he said, with deep feeling, that you were going to ask me that. The letter from the ministry came on Monday. Not the response to Harry's inquiry, that would take time, and Harry had expected time. This was a different letter, shorter, written on the thick cream parchment that the ministry used for official correspondence, sealed with a wax stamp of the ministry crest. Harry opened it at breakfast and read it while the morning post was still arriving in the general chaos of owls overhead. It was from the office of the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, which was a significantly more senior office than the one he'd written to. Someone had escalated his inquiry. The letter acknowledged his correspondence, confirmed the receipt of his formal inquiry regarding Potter family estate management protocols, and informed him that the relevant files had been requested from the Records Division and would be made available to his legal representative upon submission of appropriate credentials. And then, at the bottom, a handwritten postscript in neat, precise handwriting that was not the official ministry hand of the main letter. The inquiry you've submitted has been noted at the Wisengamot senior level. It would be my privilege to discuss the matter further at your convenience. Regards, A.M. Harry looked at the initials for a moment. Then he turned the letter over, looking for additional markings, and found a small wax seal on the back flap that he hadn't noticed, a different seal, personal rather than official, in the shape of something he recognized from the Wisengamot section of his Hogwarts, a history. The seal of a senior Wisengamot member. He folded the letter carefully and put it away. "What is it?" Hermione asked, reading his face. "I'm not sure yet," Harry said honestly. "But someone at the Wisengamot is paying attention." "Good or bad attention?" Harry thought about the careful, personal postscript. The choice to write by hand rather than through the official channel. It would be my privilege. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm going to find out." Ron was looking at the ceiling, calculating something. "How many people are on the Wisengamot?" 50 permanent members, various temporary ones, and the senior membership of about 15 who hold ancient family seats, Hermione said, without looking up from her breakfast. Then she did look up. The AM signature. "Yes," Harry said. "That could be." She ran through names in her head, visible on her face like a search engine working. "Amelia Marsh. But she's not senior Wisengamot." "Archibald Merton. He retired in, I'll write back today," Harry said. "I'll find out." "Be careful," Hermione said. An unexpected ally can also be someone finding out how much you know before deciding whether to be an obstacle. "I know." He looked at her. "Which is why I'll write back as Lord Potter and ask for a formal meeting in an official venue. No private correspondence. Nothing informal." Hermione held his gaze for a moment. Then, "Good." They went to class. Defense against the dark arts that afternoon had an edge to it that Harry had been feeling since the second lesson, a quality to Professor Quirrell's anxiety that felt like it was calibrated wrong. Too present in some moments, too absent in others, as if the anxiety was being managed rather than experienced. Harry sat in the back of the classroom this time, which was unusual for him, and watched Quirrell teach from behind and noted the things he noted. The turban. Always the turban, despite the smell of garlic and the generally warm indoor temperature of the castle. The way Quirrell's hands shook with a tremor that was never consistent, sometimes present, sometimes not. The way he never fully turned his back on the class and the front of the room simultaneously, as if managing the geometry of it. After class, on the way out, Quirrell's eyes met Harry's. Just for a moment. And Harry felt something in that look, a recognition, and behind it something else, older and colder and not Quirrell at all, and filed it in the category of things I know that I need to know more about, and walked out into the corridor with Ron and Hermione and said nothing about it. Not yet. Wednesday evening, Harry was in the library. He'd been there for an hour, working through a supplemental text on charms theory that Flitwick had mentioned almost in passing during a lesson, the kind of mention that was clearly deliberate, a teacher who could see which students would follow up and which wouldn't. Harry had followed up. He was 3 chapters in and making notes. The library was quiet at this hour, other students spread out at tables in the amber lamplight, the specific library quiet that was made of suppressed coughs and turned pages and the occasional scratch of quill. Harry had a table to himself, which he usually got because people were still slightly uncertain about him in the way that people were uncertain about someone they'd built up an image of in their heads and hadn't yet reconciled with the actual person. He looked up because the air in the library shifted slightly, not magically, not anything dramatic, just the way the air shifts when someone enters a room and carries a particular presence. Draco Malfoy. He was alone, which was unusual. Harry had noticed that Draco rarely moved through Hogwarts without Crabbe and Goyle on either side, who served as a kind of physical assertion of status, but tonight he was alone, and he walked through the library with that straight-backed Malfoy carriage and sat down at the table 2 away from Harry's and opened a book. They worked in parallel silence for about 10 minutes. Then Draco said, without looking up, you went to see Dumbledore. Word travels, Harry said. I heard it from a Gryffindor prefect. He mentioned it to someone. It went around. Draco turned a page. What did you talk about? That's between me and Dumbledore. A pause. My father had a letter last week. From the ministry. Another page. He was unsettled by something in it. He didn't say what. But my father is not often unsettled. He finally looked up. I've been at Hogwarts for a week and a half and you've already sent something to the ministry that unsettled Lucius Malfoy. Harry looked at him steadily. Is that a complaint or a compliment? Draco's expression was doing the complicated thing again, the thing from Madame Malkin's, the thing where the expected response was somewhere and the actual response was somewhere else entirely. I'm not sure, he said honestly. I'm still deciding. Let me know when you do, Harry said, and went back to his charms text. Draco looked at him for a moment longer. Then he went back to his book. They worked in silence until the library closed, and when they left they went in different directions without acknowledgement, and Harry walked back through the castle to Gryffindor Tower and past Percy Weasley on the 6th floor and nodded at a portrait of a 16th-century Hogwarts founder and climbed through the fat lady's portrait hole and found Ron asleep in his armchair and Hermione still reading, and sat down by the fire and opened his charms text again and thought about everything. In motion, the ministry letters, the solicitor, the Wizengamot, Dumbledore's revised calculations, Draco Malfoy's complicated expression, the thing behind Quirrell's eyes. All of it moving. He was 11 years old and he had been at Hogwarts for 9 days and somewhere in Gringotts' deep records rooms the Goblins were building his full ledger and somewhere in London a solicitor was reading certified documentation and somewhere in the ministry an official with the initials AM had written a careful handwritten postscript on cream ministry parchment. Harry looked at the fire and felt, not for the first time and not for the last, the particular feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because someone else had put him there. Because he'd chosen it. Chapter 5, The Architecture of Allies. The reply from AM came on Thursday. Harry had written back Wednesday night, a short, deliberate note, formally addressed, requesting a meeting in an official capacity at a time and venue of their choosing, and signing it with full titles. He hadn't expected a response for days. The owl arrived at breakfast Thursday with the punctuality of someone who had been waiting for the reply, which told him something immediately. The letter was from Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Not a senior Wizengamot member in the hereditary sense, she held an appointed seat, which was different, and Harry had read the distinction in the Hogwarts Library's copy of Wizengamot Quarterly well enough to understand what it meant. Her authority came from competence and position rather than bloodline, which meant she had gotten to where she was entirely on the strength of being very good at her job, which meant she was the kind of person who read files carefully and acted on what they said rather than on who had sent them. The letter was direct in the way that competent bureaucrats are direct when they've decided something is genuinely important. Lord Potter, your inquiry to the Records Division was forwarded to my office as a matter of standard escalation protocol for estate inquiries involving currently active ministry protocols. I have reviewed the relevant files. I would like to meet with you in person at your earliest convenience, not at the ministry, as I think a less formal environment would be more appropriate for an initial conversation. I will be visiting Hogwarts on official business the week of October the 15th. If you are willing, I would be glad to schedule time to speak privately. I will only say this, what I found in those files warrants discussion. Amelia Bones, head, DMLE. Harry read it twice over his porridge, folded it with the others in the charmed inner pocket, and thought about the phrase currently active ministry protocols and what it implied about what she'd found. Well? Hermione said. Amelia Bones, Harry said. Hermione put down her spoon. Head of the DMLE. She's coming to Hogwarts in a fortnight. She wants to meet. That's significant, Hermione said carefully. She's not someone who wastes time. Everything I've read about her, she's strictly procedural, extremely difficult to influence politically, and she has a reputation for pursuing cases regardless of whose names come up in them. I know, Harry said. Ron was listening with the focused attention of someone who was following the thread of this clearly enough to know it mattered. Is she on your side or is she investigating you? Both, possibly, Harry said. But mostly I think she found something in those ministry files that she didn't put there herself and didn't know about, and now she's the head of the department whose name is technically on it, and she wants to understand it before it becomes her problem. She wants to know what you know, Ron said. And I want to know what she knows, Harry said. So that works out. He finished his porridge. I'll write back today. The morning moved into Transfiguration, which was McGonagall's domain, and McGonagall ran her classroom with the precise, uncompromising standards of someone who considered sloppiness a form of disrespect. Harry liked her immediately and absolutely. There was no gap between what she said and what she meant, which was so refreshing after a week of navigating Hogwarts' social atmosphere that it almost made him feel lightheaded. She transformed her desk into a pig and back again on the first day by way of demonstration, and Harry had written in his notes, the intention has to be complete before the transformation begins. Half intention produces half result. And then, beneath it, underlined, applies elsewhere. McGonagall noticed his notes during the second lesson the same way Flitwick had, and said nothing during class but handed him a small piece of parchment on his way out the door that had the name of a supplementary text written on it. Harry added it to his library list. He was building a library list. It was growing. The school had a rhythm now, 9 days in, not comfortable exactly, not yet, but legible. He knew the staircases well enough to not be late. He knew which portraits would give accurate directions and which would misdirect you for their own amusement. He knew the smell of the dungeon corridor before a potions lesson, cold and sharp, and the specific warmth of the charms classroom that was partly the teaching and partly the accumulated magical residue of generations of students practicing spells in the same room. He knew that the library's restricted section could be heard from the open section on quiet evenings, a low susurrus that might have been the books talking to each other, which he filed under interesting and requiring follow-up. He knew Quirrell's schedule. He'd mapped it without quite deciding to, the way you map things that worry you, a gradual accumulation of sightings and locations, the where and when of a person's movements through a building. Quirrell had a habit of being on the third-floor corridor, the one that was supposedly forbidden for first years on pain of death, which was the kind of warning that told you what was there rather than deterring you from going there. He went in the evenings, irregularly but frequently, and he always came back with the look of someone doing something that cost them something. Harry hadn't said anything to Ron and Hermione about Quirrell yet. The thing he'd seen in that classroom, the cold recognition behind Quirrell's eyes, the presence behind the presence, he was still building the model. He needed more information before he said it out loud, because saying it out loud would require them to decide what to do about it and he didn't want to put that on them before he understood it well enough to be useful. He paid attention instead, which was what he did with everything he wasn't ready to act on yet. The week moved forward. Thursday afternoon was their first flying lesson, which happened on the rain-damp grass of the training grounds with broomsticks that had seen better decades and Madame Hooch watching with the sharp eyes of someone who had been teaching 11-year-olds to fly for long enough to know exactly which ones were going to be problems. Harry had read about flying. He had not actually flown. He understood, intellectually, that these were different experiences. He put his hand over the broom and set up with the specific quality of intention he'd been practicing since reading about it, not demanding, not tentative, just completely clear, and the broom jumped into his hand with a snap that several students around him were still trying to achieve when Madame Hooch walked the line. She paused at Harry. Looked at the broom in his hand. Looked at him. Said nothing and moved on. The lesson proceeded. Neville Longbottom's broom decided to interpret up as a suggestion rather than an instruction and rose on its own schedule, which led to a series of events that ended with Neville 20 feet in the air, then falling, then Madame Hooch taking him to the hospital wing with her face doing the specific thing it did when she was professionally concerned but maintaining professional calm. In the gap left by her departure, Draco Malfoy reached down and picked up the Remembrall that had fallen from Neville's pocket. Harry watched this. He watched the way Draco held it, not maliciously, not immediately, but with the thoughtless proprietary confidence of someone who had spent their life handling things that weren't theirs because no one had ever made a problem of it. He watched Draco look at the Remembrall, look at the sky, look at the first years watching him. "Give it back," Harry said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just the same tone he used for everything, clear and complete. Draco looked at him. "I was going to put it somewhere he could find it. Up on the roof, maybe." "Give it back," Harry said again, exactly the same way. There was a moment. Draco's eyes did the thing they'd been doing since Madame Malkin's, the complicated calculation, the script not quite fitting the situation. Around them the other students were watching with the specific attention of people observing something they couldn't yet predict the outcome of. Draco held out the Remembrall. Harry took it. Not a confrontation. Not a victory exactly. Just, a thing that had been moving one way redirected by a single clear intervention. Draco looked at him with an expression that was still calculating and said, quietly enough for only Harry to hear, "You're different every time I see you." "No," Harry said. "You're just recalibrating." Draco thought about that for a moment. Then Madame Hooch came back, and the lesson resumed, and Harry mounted his broom for the first time. The first time Harry Potter flew was not spectacular. It was better than spectacular. It was entirely natural, not in the way things are natural when they're easy, but in the way things are natural when they're right, when the body and the task are in genuine alignment and the mind goes quiet because it doesn't need to manage what the body already knows. He went up 50 feet, felt the cold air at that altitude and the specific aliveness of being above the ground with nothing between him and the sky, and the broom responded to the slight shifts in his weight with the sensitivity of a well-tuned instrument. He stayed at 50 feet for the rest of the lesson. He didn't show off. He didn't race or dive or do anything that would have been showing off. He just flew at 50 feet with the comfortable presence of someone in their element, and when the lesson ended he came down and dismounted and said nothing about it. Madame Hooch looked at him when he landed. Her expression had moved past professional assessment into something more personal. "You've flown before," she said. "No," Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. "I'll be watching your career with interest, Mr. Potter," she said, and walked away with the deliberate stride of someone already composing a letter to the Gryffindor Quidditch captain. Oliver Wood found him that evening. Not subtly, Wood was not subtle, operating in the specific register of someone for whom subtlety was an obstacle between him and winning Quidditch, and he appeared in the common room with the urgent energy of a person who had been told something wonderful and needed to act on it immediately. "Potter," he said, from the portrait hole, still slightly breathless from running. "I need to talk to you." Harry looked up from the charms text. "About Quidditch." Wood stopped. "How did you? Hooch told you." "Hooch didn't tell me anything." "You've got the look of someone about to offer me a Quidditch position, which means Hooch told you something." Harry set down his quill. "Seeker." Wood's face went through a brief struggle between confirming this immediately and managing the conversation strategically, and confirmation won. "Youngest Seeker in a century," he said. "First years don't normally, but Hooch said you're natural, and the team needs." "Yes," Harry said. Wood blinked. "You haven't heard the full." "Yes," Harry said again. "I want to fly. Tell me about the team." Wood pulled up a chair and began talking about the Gryffindor Quidditch team with the focused, comprehensive detail of someone who had been waiting for exactly this conversation for approximately his entire Hogwarts career. Ron leaned over from the next chair with immediate interest. Hermione went back to her book with the slightly elevated attention of someone who was listening while pretending not to. Harry listened and asked precise questions and by the end of the hour had a clear understanding of the team's strengths, its weaknesses, its historical performance against each of the other houses, and Oliver Wood's strategic priorities for the season. He also had the offer of use of the pitch for private practice 3 evenings a week starting the following Monday, which Wood had arranged by some mechanism he didn't explain and Harry didn't ask about because the mechanism wasn't relevant to the outcome. When Wood finally left, Ron said, "You're going to be brilliant at Quidditch." "I know," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "You know, I love that you just say that," he said. "Most people would say I hope so or something." "Why?" "I know I flew well. Pretending I don't know it to seem humble is just inaccurate." Harry picked up his charms text. "There's enough inaccurate information in my life already." Hermione lowered her book. "That's a philosophy." "It's just practicality," Harry said. She considered it. "No," she said. "It's a philosophy. A good one, but still." She went back to her book. The fortnight between Bones's letter and her visit was full. It was full in the way that Hogwarts was full, lessons and homework and the gradual, ongoing project of learning the texture of a new world from the inside. Harry moved through it paying the particular kind of attention that was becoming, he recognized, simply how he moved through everything. Not suspicious of it, that would have been exhausting, but genuinely observant. The difference was, suspicion assumed threat, and his approach assumed information. Everything he saw was something he might need later. He noticed that the Gryffindor common room operated on a social dynamic that had Fred and George Weasley at the creative center, not the power center, which was Percy's by prefect authority, but the energy center, the place where the room's tone was actually set. He noticed that Neville Longbottom was considerably more capable than he appeared, operating under the specific handicap of having been told he wasn't capable so consistently that he'd internalized it as fact and then lived inside that fact. He noticed this and began, carefully and without comment, sitting near Neville in herbology and asking him questions that let Neville demonstrate what he actually knew. Neville, after 3 sessions of this, looked at Harry one afternoon with an expression of slightly dazed gratitude and said, "I think you're the first person who ever asked me how to do something in herbology. You know more about it than anyone in our year," Harry said. It was accurate. Why wouldn't I ask? Neville had nothing to say to that. But something in his posture shifted, and the next herbology lesson he answered a question Sprout asked unprompted, and she gave him 10 points for Gryffindor, and his face did something astonished and pleased that Harry thought probably shouldn't have been unusual for an 11-year-old boy but clearly was. He noticed the Slytherin table. Not obsessively, he didn't watch Draco Malfoy with any particular fixation. But they shared enough classes that observation was inevitable, and what he observed was a Draco who was consistently performing something he wasn't quite sure he was, the way an actor performs a role so often they've forgotten the line between the role and the person. The Slytherin Draco, the one who existed for Crabbe and Goyle and Pansy Parkinson and the rest of the table, was confident and contemptuous and entirely at ease. The Draco who had sat in the library and said "I'm still deciding" was a different version, quieter, more genuinely curious. Harry had no agenda about which one was real. But he noted the distance between them. He also noticed, with the precise peripheral awareness of someone who had been followed before and knew the feeling, that he was being watched fairly consistently. Not by students, that was constant and expected. By the castle itself, in a way. By something that moved in the walls and between the portraits and occasionally in the specific quality of the silence in certain corridors. He felt it first on the 7th floor and then on the 3rd, and it felt old and attentive, and it felt, not hostile, not surveilling in the cold institutional way. More like a large, intelligent animal keeping track of something it had decided was significant. He decided to let it watch. October the 15th arrived clear and cold, the grounds brittle with the first serious suggestion of winter, the lake gunmetal and still. Amelia Bones arrived mid-morning with the brisk efficiency of someone whose time was always somewhat overcommitted and who managed it by moving faster than the deficit. She was a square-jawed, steel-haired woman in her mid-50s with a monocle that she wore with the unself-conscious practicality of someone whose eyesight needed it rather than as an affectation. She had the bearing of someone who had made very serious decisions for a very long time and had learned to carry that weight without it becoming visible. Harry met her in the room that McGonagall had offered for the purpose, a small, book-lined meeting room on the 2nd floor that was used for staff consultations and had the advantage of being both private and thoroughly warded. McGonagall herself had arranged this, which told Harry that McGonagall knew about the meeting, which told him that McGonagall was either informed or Bones had requested it officially through Hogwarts channels. He arrived 5 minutes early. Bones was already there. She stood up when he came in and shook his hand with the grip of a woman who had spent decades shaking hands and had no patience for weak ones. She assessed him in a single, comprehensive sweep, the rings on his hands, his posture, his face, and then sat back down with the expression of someone whose assessment had confirmed something. "Lord Potter," she said. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for coming," Harry said. They sat across from each other at the small table and there was a moment, brief, mutual, of two people calibrating. Not adversarially. Just precisely. "I'll be direct," Bones said. "I think you deserve direct. I appreciate it. When your letter reached the records division and was escalated to me, I pulled the Potter family estate management files as a matter of procedure." She folded her hands on the table. "What I found in those files, I'm going to tell you what I found and I need you to understand that my telling you is not standard procedure and represents a personal judgment call on my part about what's right and what's necessary." "I understand," Harry said. "The ministry has been serving as a secondary authorization body for certain actions taken under your guardianship contract," she said. "Specifically, there is a sealed protocol, number M17-81, if the file reference is useful to you, that was filed in November 1981 and co-signed by the Minister of Magic at the time, and which authorized Albus Dumbledore to act as your magical guardian with expanded authority, including the strategic deployment clause you've already challenged at Gringotts." Harry kept his breathing steady. "The ministry co-signed the guardianship." "Yes. Which means the ministry is a party to the contract, which means any challenge to the contract potentially involves the ministry as a respondent rather than merely a witness." She held his gaze. "You understand what that means?" "It means any Wizengamot challenge to the guardianship isn't just against Dumbledore," Harry said. "It's against the ministry itself." "Which was probably the intention when the protocol was drafted," Bones said. "Creating a structure that would be practically difficult to challenge because of the number of parties involved." She paused. "I am not telling you this to discourage you. I am telling you this so that you understand the full shape of what you're dealing with." "Who drafted the protocol?" Harry said. "It was filed by Cornelius Fudge's predecessor." However, she paused. "The language in the protocol is specific in ways that the predecessor's office was not known for. The precision of the legal drafting is consistent with someone who was advising the minister rather than working directly from the minister's office." "Dumbledore," Harry said. "That's a conclusion you've drawn," Bones said carefully. "I'm not in a position to state it officially. But you're not contradicting it." A pause. "No." Harry looked at the table for a moment, running through the implications. The ministry co-signing the protocol was a complication, significant, but not unsurmountable, and he'd known from the moment he read magical law and knew that there would be complications. What mattered was understanding all of them before trying to move. "Miss Bones," he said. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you are 11 years old, and someone spent a decade making very significant decisions about your life without your knowledge or consent, and those decisions were made using ministry resources, and I am the head of the department whose name is on the relevant protocol, and I did not put it there." She paused. "I also have a niece starting Hogwarts next year. And I find that the things that make me angry professionally and the things that make me angry personally have a tendency to overlap." Harry looked at her. "You want to make it right." "I want to do my job properly," she said. "Which, in this case, amounts to the same thing." She unfolded her hands and placed a sealed document on the table. "This is an official copy of Protocol M17-81, certified by my office. It is yours. Your solicitor will find it useful." Harry took it. "Thank you." "There are other things," she said. "The protocol includes provisions beyond the guardianship. There are references to the Potter family Wizengamot seats that suggest someone was actively managing your political inheritance as well as your financial one, specifically, keeping the seats in a state of registered vacancy to prevent them from being filled by proxy or activating automatically. Keeping them empty," Harry said. Keeping them controllable, Bones said. Empty seats can be moved around in Wizengamot procedure. Occupied seats cannot. She looked at him. When you formally claim those seats, you will be activating 2 votes that have been politically absent for 11 years. There are people who benefit from that absence. How many? Several, she said. Some of them are on what you'd probably consider the wrong side. Some of them are on what you'd consider the right side. She held his gaze. Politics in the Wizengamot is not a clean story. I know, Harry said. I'm learning fast. She studied him for a moment. Yes, she said. I can see that. She stood. I'll leave the document with you. If there are additional files from the records division that you need, I can facilitate the request through official channels, faster than the standard route. It would be within my authority. She paused. Discreetly. Harry stood too. I appreciate that. They shook hands again. She was already moving toward the door with the trajectory of someone who had 3 more things to do today and was managing the time between them. At the door she stopped. One more thing, she said, without turning around. The people who benefit from your family seats remaining vacant, one of them is currently sitting on the Wizengamot and has been since 1982. His name is Lucius Malfoy. His seat was granted by a vote that would have been blocked if the Potter seats had been occupied. She left. Harry stood in the small book-lined room and held the sealed document and thought about Draco Malfoy in the library, saying my father was unsettled. Thought about Draco saying I'm still deciding. Thought about the space between the public Draco and the private one. He put the document away in the charmed pocket. Then he went to find Ron. Ron was in the common room and Harry dropped into the chair beside him and said, I need to tell you and Hermione something tonight. All of it. Not summaries, not selected parts. Everything. Ron put down the charms homework he'd been halfway through. Everything. The full picture. I've been building it in pieces and now I need to say it out loud to people who are paying attention to all of it with me, because there's too much for one person to hold. He paused. After dinner. Common room, when it's quiet. Ron nodded. I'll tell Hermione. Tell Neville too. Ron's eyebrows went up. Neville? He's solid, Harry said. He keeps what he's told. And I think, he stopped. I think the more people who are paying attention, the safer everyone is. Including him. Ron looked at him. Then he looked at Neville across the room, bent over his herbology homework with that expression of determined hopefulness, and something moved through Ron's face that was the shape of recognition. Yeah, Ron said. Okay. After dinner, when the common room had thinned to mostly older students and the fire was the good evening fire, Harry and Ron and Hermione and a slightly bewildered but very focused Neville Longbottom sat in the 4 chairs nearest the hearth, and Harry told them everything. He started with the sea. The hut on the rock, the storm, Hagrid's unease on the water. He told it the way it had happened, not as a story about himself, not performing the significance of it, just the sequence of events and what they'd revealed. The inheritance scan. The bindings. The vaults and the lordships. The guardianship contract and its clause. He told them about Dumbledore's letter and the Saturday meeting in the circular office. He told them about Bones and the Ministry protocol and Lucius Malfoy's Wizengamot seat. He told them about the thing behind Quirrell's eyes. That last one landed in the room differently than everything else, a specific kind of landing, the kind where the silence that follows is not the silence of shock but of recognition. Hermione went very still. Ron sat forward. Neville, who had been listening with his large, steady gaze, said, I felt it too. In the corridor last week. I couldn't name it. What did it feel like? Harry asked. Neville thought about it. Cold, he said carefully. But not like a draft. Like when you walk into a room where something bad happened a long time ago and the room remembers. Yes, Harry said. That's it. There's something on that third-floor corridor, Hermione said. I've been trying to find the reference in the library, but anything about enhanced security or hidden chambers isn't in the accessible stacks. Dumbledore said first years shouldn't go there, Ron said. Pain of a very painful death or something. Which means there's something worth protecting there, Harry said. Something. Dumbledore moved to Hogwarts deliberately. He paused. I think Quirrell is either controlled by Voldemort or carrying him somehow. The presence I felt wasn't Quirrell's. I think Quirrell is trying to get to whatever's on that corridor. The fire popped. One of the older students across the room laughed at something and didn't look up. The ordinary common room life went on around the four of them sitting in their chairs with the quieter, denser reality of what they were discussing. What do we do? Neville asked. We watch, Harry said. Carefully. We don't go near the corridor ourselves unless we absolutely have to. We pay attention to Quirrell, his patterns, his movements, when he goes near the third floor, what he looks like after. He looked at each of them. I'm not going to ask any of you to put yourselves at risk. You're not asking, Ron said. We're deciding. Ron, you explained it to us, Ron said, with the simple, immovable logic of someone who has made up his mind. That means we're in it. You don't get to explain something to people and then tell them it's not their problem. Hermione was nodding. Neville was nodding more slowly but just as firmly. Harry looked at them. These three people who had known him for 15 days, sitting in a circle of firelight, deciding. All right, he said. There's one more thing, Hermione said. She'd been holding something back for the last part of the conversation, he could tell, the look of someone with a point they've been waiting for the right moment to make. The legal challenge. The Wizengamot seats. The Ministry protocol. She looked at Harry. You're moving very fast. All of this, it's right and it's necessary, but it's also visible. Everyone who's been benefiting from your invisibility is going to start noticing that you're not invisible anymore. I know, Harry said. And some of them are going to push back in ways that are harder than Lucius Malfoy being unsettled by a letter. I know that too. So I'm not saying stop, she said clearly. I'm saying, what's the plan when they push back? Harry looked at the fire for a moment. The plan is to have already built enough of a foundation that pushing back becomes more costly than leaving things alone. He paused. The Gringotts documents. Bones and the Ministry protocol. The solicitor with the certified files. The regular meetings with Dumbledore where he at least knows I'm not ignorant and I'm not alone. He paused again. The Wizengamot seats, once I formally claim them, give me standing to be heard. I can't vote yet but I can be present and recognized and that changes the room. Standing makes you harder to dismiss, Hermione said. Yes. And the legal foundation makes any action against you legally expensive, she said. Yes. She pressed her lips together, the expression of someone checking a complicated calculation and finding the math sound. Okay, she said. Then we also need to build your academic reputation. Fast. I'm already doing well not just well, she said. Undeniably, visibly, indisputably well. Because when someone powerful wants to marginalize someone, the first thing they do is find a reason to suggest that person's judgment is poor. If you're academically above reproach, that avenue is closed. She looked at him. I'm not saying be perfect. I'm saying be seen to be good. Harry looked at her. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this since the train, she said, entirely without embarrassment. You told us what was going on, which meant I started working on the problem. That's what I do. Ron was grinning. This is why we sit at the same table. Neville cleared his throat. I could help with herbology, he said, slightly tentatively, then with more steadiness, I mean, Professor Sprout already likes you. If you start demonstrating genuine interest, not just getting the marks, but asking the right questions, going to extra sessions, she's on the staff. Her good opinion matters. He paused. She's also been here a very long time and she knows which staff members she trusts and which ones she doesn't, and staff opinions matter more than people think when it comes to how a student is perceived. Everyone looked at Neville for a moment. That, Harry said, is excellent. Neville went slightly pink. I just know herbology. You know how Hogwarts works, Harry said. That's more useful. 2 days later, Saturday morning, Harry was in Dumbledore's office for the second scheduled meeting, and he had brought the sealed ministry document from Bones. Not as a weapon. As a data point. He put it on the cleared desk and said, "This is a copy of Protocol M-17-81. I thought you should know I have it." Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. "Amelia Bones," he said. "Yes. She is thorough," Dumbledore said. "And then, after a pause, and correct to give it to you." Harry looked at him. "I knew you would find it eventually," Dumbledore said. Not defensively, with the specific honesty of someone who has decided that at least in this room, with this person, defensiveness is no longer strategically or morally viable. "I had hoped it would be later." "Why later?" Harry said. "What was different about later that you needed?" Dumbledore was quiet. He looked at Fawkes, who was watching them both with that inscrutable gold gaze. "I wanted you to understand the threat first," he said. "To understand Voldemort, what he is, what he's capable of, before you understood the full weight of what would be asked of you. I thought," he stopped. "I thought that the shape of your life would make you more willing to sacrifice it," Harry said. A long silence. "More understanding," Dumbledore said. "Of what sacrifice sometimes requires." Harry looked at him steadily. "I understand sacrifice. My parents made one. I honor that. I have the contract to prove that I'll do what's needed." He paused. "But you weren't trying to teach me about sacrifice. You were trying to make me willing to die without asking whether dying was actually necessary." Dumbledore was very still. "I don't know yet," Harry continued, "whether it is. Whether there's a version of this that doesn't end with me dead in exchange for Voldemort being gone. Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't. But I need to know the actual truth of it, the full prophecy, the full picture, before I can make any real decision." He held Dumbledore's eyes. "Don't I deserve that?" The fire was quiet. The portraits were all awake, Harry noticed, all of them watching. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Then tell me," Harry said. "Not everything at once. I'm not asking for everything at once. But tell me the truth as it's relevant, as I'm ready for it, and trust me to handle it. Because the alternative is me finding everything out in pieces through solicitors and ministry officials and certified Gringotts documents, and that is," he paused, "a significantly less efficient way to prepare someone for a war." The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "You're scheduling my honesty," he said, with the dry warmth that was the most genuinely unguarded thing about him. "Along with my Saturday mornings." "Someone has to," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time in the 2 Saturdays they'd sat in this room, he picked up his wand, not to cast, just held it loosely, the gesture of a man who thinks better with something in his hands, and leaned back in his chair and said, "The prophecy states, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches." He told Harry the prophecy. Not all at once. Not in the practiced, shaped way of a man who had rehearsed this disclosure for maximum emotional impact. He told it in the halting, imprecise way of someone making the actual decision to be honest in real time, the words slightly rough at the edges, and when he finished he looked at Harry with those blue eyes and waited. Harry sat with it for a full minute. The office breathed around them. "Neither can live while the other survives," Harry said, repeating the last clause back. "That doesn't mean I have to die." No, Dumbledore said. It means one of you must stop being able to survive. He paused. Which is a very different, which means I need to be strong enough to end it, Harry said. Not small enough to accept it. He looked at Dumbledore. That's the mistake you were making. A long silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. I believe you may be right. Outside the office windows, the October sky was full and grey and cold, and somewhere on the grounds Ron was probably at Quidditch practice, and Hermione was probably in the library, and Neville was probably in the greenhouse asking Sprout a careful question about Devil's Snare. All of it happening at once, the ordinary and the enormous, the way it always did. Harry picked up his cloak. Same time next Saturday, he said. Same time, Dumbledore said. And Harry stopped at the door. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. It was quiet and it was plain and it carried the weight of something genuinely meant. For the bindings, and for the vaults, and for the years of choosing smallness on your behalf. I am sorry. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. I know, he said. That's why I keep coming back. He went down the revolving stairs and back into the castle, and the portraits watched him go, and the rings were warm on his hands, and the castle felt, as it always did now, like arriving somewhere. Every single time. Chapter 6, The weight of what was owed. November arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, not gradually but all at once, the castle waking up one morning to find that autumn had settled its accounts and winter had moved into the vacancy. The grounds went iron grey and the lake stopped reflecting anything except the sky, and the fires in the common rooms became the primary source of warmth and the center of gravity for every evening. The staircases were cold on the exposed stretches. The Ollery was brutal. Harry flew in it anyway. 3 evenings a week, as Wood had arranged, and sometimes a fourth on his own time when the rest of the team had gone in and the sky was still light enough to be useful. The cold didn't bother him in any way that was worth mentioning. He flew the way he did everything now, with full attention, without performance, learning the broom-specific responses the way you learn a language, going past competence towards something more instinctive and less conscious. He could find the snitch in practice with a consistency that made Wood go slightly manic with suppressed excitement, which Harry found quietly entertaining. He was also, in the same November, doing everything else. Academic performance, as Hermione had said, needed to be visible and indisputable, and Harry had approached this with the same systematic attention he brought to the Gringotts documents or Dumbledore's Saturday conversations. Not grinding work, not the joyless accumulation of marks for their own sake, but genuine engagement with the material that happened to produce excellent results because genuine engagement with things you're intelligent about tends to do that. Flitwick had taken him aside after the 3rd week to suggest, with barely contained delight, that Harry might want to consider attempting spells from the second-year text as supplementary practice. Harry was already halfway through it. McGonagall said nothing direct but the quality of her silences when she marked his work said plenty. She had the particular expressive precision of someone who communicated most clearly in what they chose not to say. Snape had stopped trying the ambush method. He'd shifted to a different approach, hard marking, technical demands that went beyond what was strictly required at first-year level, a standard of precision that he applied selectively and that Harry simply met. Every time. Without complaint, without flourish, just the quiet execution of whatever was set in front of him. The class had noticed. The particular tension of their first lesson, the expectation of Harry's humiliation, had shifted into something else, a different expectation that Harry suspected Snape found considerably more uncomfortable. One afternoon in late October, Snape had handed back an essay on the properties of flobberworm mucus with a red E at the top and a single marginal note, precise. No other comment. Harry had put it in his folder and said nothing, and Hermione had seen it from across the table and said nothing either, which meant she understood that the nothing was the right response. The Saturday meetings with Dumbledore had continued. They had developed a rhythm, not quite comfortable, not quite formal, somewhere in between. Dumbledore talked about Voldemort with increasing honesty, the history of Tom Riddle, Wool's orphanage and Hogwarts, and the slow, deliberate construction of a persona and a power base over decades. He talked about it like a case study, which it was, with the analytical remove of someone who had been studying the subject for 50 years and had the complicated feelings about it that long familiarity produces. Harry listened with the attention he always gave to things that mattered and asked questions that made Dumbledore occasionally pause before answering, not evasively, but in the way of someone genuinely reconsidering how much they know about a subject when someone asks the right question. Why did Riddle pursue immortality specifically? Harry had asked, in the third Saturday meeting. Fear of death, Dumbledore had said. The most ordinary and the most extraordinary human fear, scaled to an extraordinary power and an extraordinary will. Then his weakness isn't power, Harry had said. It's the thing underneath the power. The fear. Dumbledore had looked at him over his half-moon glasses for a long moment. Yes, he'd said. I have believed that for some time. I am glad you see it. Something that afraid, Harry had said, can be beaten. You can't scare it away because it's already afraid. But you can make its fear irrelevant. Make it so that the thing it feared most has happened and it survived it anyway, and now it has nothing left to protect. He'd paused. He tried to kill me and created the opposite of what he intended. That's not just irony. That's information. Dumbledore had been quiet for a long time after that. The legal architecture was also developing. Goldwater and Brine, specifically a solicitor named Miriam Brine, the current generation of the family firm, sharp and deliberate and with a way of reading documents that reminded Harry of Griphook in its compressed efficiency, had filed 3 formal challenges with the Wizengamot, the Guardianship Clause challenge, which was progressing through the relevant procedural stages, and 2 motions relating to the Potter family seat authorization that Bones had made available through official channels. None of it would be resolved quickly. Miriam Brine had been explicit about that in their first correspondence. Wizengamot procedure is not designed for speed. It is designed for thoroughness. Patience is not a virtue here, Lord Potter, it is a requirement. Harry was patient. He had been learning patience since he was old enough to know that the Dursleys' moods were weather patterns you waited out rather than forces you contested before you were ready. The difference was that now the patience had a direction. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was November the 12th. Harry knew about Quidditch matches in theory, he'd read about them, listened to would describe them with the detailed passion of a general discussing his campaigns, talked through strategy with Ron who understood the game instinctively from years of watching his brothers play. He understood the rules, the positions, the technical demands of seeking specifically. What he had not understood, until he flew out through the changing room doors into the November morning with 10,000 cubic feet of cold Scottish air above him and 600 people in the stands making the kind of noise that moved through the chest rather than just the ears, was the scale of it. He sat on his Nimbus 2000 at 200 feet and looked down at the pitch and the crowd and the 10 other players and the Slytherin team in their green and silver taking their positions with the particular aggressive ease of people who expected to win. He looked at all of it with his full attention for about 3 seconds, and then he let it go, not dismissed, just released, filed into the background where it would become context rather than distraction, and found the altitude where the snitch most often appeared in the first few minutes of play and went there. The game began. He found the snitch in 13 minutes. Not by luck, by the accumulated pattern recognition of weeks of practice, the knowledge of altitude and light and the particular way the snitch moved relative to other moving objects, the awareness that had become instinctive enough to operate without conscious direction. He saw it in his peripheral vision and went straight for it, and the Slytherin seeker, Flint's cousin, saw him go and chased but was half a second behind, and half a second was enough. The catch was clean. One hand, without breaking, slightly uncomfortable angle on the wrist that he'd remember to adjust for next time, and the snitch's wings beat against his palm and the crowd became a single enormous sound. Gryffindor, 170. Slytherin, 20. Wood was incoherent with joy. Harry landed, handed the snitch to the referee, and looked for Ron and Hermione and Neville in the stands. Ron was standing on his seat. Hermione was applauding with that same focused intensity, slightly pink from the cold. Neville was making a sound that didn't have a word. At the Slytherin stand he could see the Malfoy section. Draco had attended, as most students did, and he was sitting with his housemates in the posture of someone who was not going to show what he was feeling in this crowd. His eyes met Harry's across the distance, briefly, with the complicated Malfoy expression that Harry had come to recognize as "I'm still deciding" with a new layer of information added. Harry nodded once. Draco didn't nod back. But he didn't look away first. 3 days after the Quidditch match, Harry skipped dinner. Not entirely, he grabbed something from the kitchens, which the house elves provided with the cheerful efficiency of people who found nothing unusual about a student stopping by at dinner time, which he filed under Hogwarts infrastructure worth understanding better. He ate quickly and went to the third-floor corridor. He'd been building to this for weeks. Every observation, every map of Quirrell's movements, every piece of the picture he'd been assembling, it had been pointing here, and the pointing had become insistent enough that ignoring it would have been its own kind of recklessness. He went alone. Deliberately alone. Not because he didn't trust Ron and Hermione and Neville, he trusted them completely, but because what he was going to do was survey, not act, and survey was better done by one person than 4 when the risk level was unknown. The corridor was locked by a standard Alohomora on the door, which told him the lock was a courtesy deterrent rather than a serious security measure, which told him the serious security was further in. He cast it wandlessly, something that had been happening with increasing frequency since the bindings were removed, wandless work that was imprecise but present, like a voice learning to carry without amplification, and the door opened quietly. The 3-headed dog was massive, occupying the room in the specific way of animals that have been made too large for their environment, and it was asleep. 3 enormous heads, 3 sets of closed eyes, 3 slow breathing rhythms slightly out of sync with each other. In front of it, a trapdoor in the floor. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the dog for 30 seconds. He could feel the music, not actual music, but the residue of it, the enchantment that kept the dog sleeping. Some kind of charm. He looked at the trapdoor and assessed the situation with the precise practicality he developed for all risk evaluations. What do I gain from going further right now? What do I risk? What information do I have and what do I need? What he gained, whatever was down there. He didn't know enough about it yet. What he risked, waking 3 very large heads. What he needed, more information before committing to an action in an unknown environment with no backup. He stepped back out of the corridor and closed the door. Not because he was afraid. Because it wasn't time yet and there was no purpose in forcing the timing. He made a mental note of everything he'd seen, the dog, its sleep pattern, the music enchantment, the trapdoor's approximate size and position, and added it to the model. Then he went back to Gryffindor Tower and told Ron, Hermione, and Neville exactly what he'd found. The reply from Gringotts arrived on a Tuesday, which was becoming, in Harry's internal calendar, the Gringotts Day, the Tuesday owl that brought the next installment of whatever Griphook and the account managers were compiling. This one was heavier than the previous ones, sealed with 2 wax stamps instead of 1, and when Harry opened it at the breakfast table he saw why. The full accounting of the 43 withdrawals, certified and cross-referenced. And a letter from Griphook that was, for Griphook, almost warm. Lord Potter, the lordship rings have been noted as claimed and registered in the Gringotts family records. You should also be aware that the formal registration triggered a notification to the Wisengamot Family Records Office, as is standard. Your presence as an active noble house is now on the official record. Griphook, Senior Account Manager, Gringotts Bank. Harry read items 17 through 22. Items 17 through 22 were the 6 withdrawals that formed a pattern distinct from the others, smaller amounts, irregular intervals, but with a consistent destination notation that the other withdrawals didn't have. Most withdrawals listed a purpose, even vaguely: estate maintenance, educational fund, trust administration. These 6 had a different notation. 2 words, special provision. Special provision to whom or for what was not stated in the withdrawal records because, as a footnote in Griphook's hand explained, that information had been filed under a separate sealed ministry protocol and removed from the standard estate records. Protocol M-17-81. The same protocol Bones had given him. Harry stared at those 6 entries for a long moment. Then he looked up from the documents. Hermione and Ron were watching him. The withdrawals, he said quietly. 6 of them were tied directly to the Ministry protocol. Whatever they were for, it wasn't estate management. It was something else. He paused. Bones needs to see these. Write to her today, Hermione said immediately. I already am, Harry said, picking up his quill. The November Hogsmeade weekend was for 3rd years and above, which meant Harry couldn't go, but Hagrid invited him to tea on the Sunday afternoon and Harry walked down through the cold to the groundskeeper's cottage with his hands in his pockets and the particular feeling of someone going somewhere they were unambiguously welcomed. The cottage was warm in the specific way of spaces inhabited by someone who runs warm, a fire that didn't need to be as large as it was, the smell of something baking, falling asleep on a rug with the devoted contentment of a dog who has concluded that his life is perfect. Hagrid opened the door before Harry knocked and had the kettle going before Harry had his coat off, and there were rock cakes on the table that Harry ate with the diplomatic determination of someone who knows they are terrible and eats them anyway because the person who made them with love. How are ye gettin' on? Hagrid asked, wrapping his hands around his bucket-sized mug. Well, Harry said. McGonagall says you're doin', Hagrid seemed to catch himself, then decided honesty was fine. She says you're doin' brilliantly. Said it to Sprout at the staff table and I happened to be nearby. Not eavesdrop pin. Definitely not, Harry said. Definitely not, Hagrid agreed. And the Quidditch, Harry, I saw that catch, I need to work on the wrist angle, Harry said. Hagrid stared at him. Yeah, caught it in 13 minutes. Against Slytherin in November. Wait until we play Hufflepuff in February and see how the wrist angle matters then. But he was smiling. Hagrid looked at him with the enormous, helpless affection he always looked at Harry with, and Harry let himself feel it, not deflect from it, not minimize it, but actually receive it, because it was genuine and it was earned and he was learning the difference between deflecting from something and managing it. Hagrid, Harry said, after a moment. Yeah. I want to ask you something. You don't have to answer if it's complicated. Hagrid set down his mug. Ask. In 10 years at Hogwarts, Harry said, working for Dumbledore, living here, what did you actually know about my situation? What did he tell you? Hagrid was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Fong shifted on his rug and made a sound of deep canine satisfaction. Not much, Hagrid said finally. He said yeah, we're safe. He said the blood magic with your aunt made ya safe as anywhere. He said, he stopped. He said it was best not to ask too many questions. Best to trust that he knew what he was doing. He looked at Harry. And I did. For a long time I did. But, Harry said. But I'd been there, Hagrid said, his voice going quiet and rough. When I collected ya. From the house. The state of it, Harry, and you, just a baby, not even understandin' what had happened, just, he stopped. Looked at the table. I kept thinkin' about it. Over the years. What your life was like. I asked Dumbledore once, about 2 years in, whether ya were happy. He said ya were safe, which wasn't the same thing, and I knew it wasn't the same thing, and I let him change the subject. He paused. I shouldn't have let him change the subject. You brought me to Gringotts, Harry said. Should have done it sooner. Hagrid. Harry waited until the big man looked at him. You did it when you could. That's enough. That's what matters. Hagrid made a sound that was somewhat compressed for being squeezed through his attempt at not making a sound. He looked at the fire for a while. How is he? Hagrid asked. Dumbledore. How are the Saturday things goin'? Better each week, Harry said honestly. He's genuinely brilliant. And he's trying, I think. Actually trying to recalibrate. He paused. He's been wrong about significant things for a long time, and being wrong about significant things for a long time means the wrongness gets built into how you see everything. It's not easy to unpick. No, Hagrid said. It's not. He cares about me, Harry said. In his way. That's real. He looked at the fire. It doesn't make what he did right, but it's real. They drank their tea in the comfortable quiet of people who had already said the important things and didn't need to fill the silence with smaller ones. Outside the cottage windows the November grounds were grey and still, and the lake was a flat pewter disc, and the castle rose at the end of the slope with all its lit windows and its accumulated centuries, patient as it always was. Harry, Hagrid said eventually. Yeah. On the water. When I said we were going to the Goblins first. He turned his mug in his hands. You just said okay. Yes. Didn't ask why. Didn't need convincin'. Just, okay. Hagrid looked at him. Why did ya trust me? You'd known me for 4 hours. Harry thought about it. The question deserved a real answer, not a quick one. Because you were worried, Harry said finally. Not about yourself. About me. There's a quality to it, when someone's worried about you rather than worried about how you affect them, and I've been around the second kind my whole life. The Dursleys were worried about me in the sense that I was a problem they'd been given. He paused. You were just worried. For me. Without agenda. He looked at Hagrid. I'd never had that before. I recognized it immediately. Hagrid was quiet for a moment. You'll always have it from me, he said. I know, Harry said. That's why it was so easy to say okay. December approached, and with it the accumulation of a term's worth of stakes reaching their natural convergence. The Quirrell situation had been developing in the background of everything else like a slow-developing photograph, the image becoming clearer each week. Harry had tracked the pattern carefully and with increasing concern. Quirrell was spending more time near the third floor, arriving there later and later in the evenings, and coming back from those visits looking progressively more hollowed out, as if the presence he was carrying was drawing more heavily on him over time. It was Hermione who found the reference. She'd been working through the restricted section texts with a note from McGonagall that she'd obtained by the simple mechanism of explaining, precisely and completely, why she needed access and demonstrating to McGonagall's satisfaction that she understood the material wouldn't be misused. McGonagall had looked at her for a long moment and then written the note with the brisk efficiency of someone whose own intellectual standards had been satisfied. 3 weeks into restricted section access, Hermione came to their chairs by the common room fire on a Tuesday evening with a book and a look on her face that was the look she reserved for genuinely significant findings. A Horcrux, she said, keeping her voice low. That's what a Horcrux is. She opened the book to a marked page and turned it toward them. A fragment of a soul, anchored to an object, keeping the creator tethered to life even after physical death. You can make one by committing murder and using the fracture the act creates in your soul to tear a piece away and bind it. She paused. If Voldemort made one, or more than one, then killing his body isn't enough, Harry said. No. You'd have to destroy the Horcrux first. Or he'd just persist. Come back. She pressed her lips together. But Harry, the presence you felt behind Quirrell. If Voldemort is possessing him, or attached to him, he's not fully corporeal. He doesn't have a body. Which means, the Horcrux is elsewhere, Harry said. He's already this reduced, this limited, and there's still something else anchoring him. He thought for a moment, his mind moving through the shape of it. He came to Hogwarts for what's on the 3rd floor. Dumbledore moved it here deliberately. That means whatever it is, it's bait, Ron said. Everyone looked at him. Dumbledore knows Voldemort wants it, Ron said, with the straight-line tactical clarity he applied to chess and apparently to dark wizards. So he put it somewhere he controls. Where he can watch what happens when Voldemort goes for it. He paused. Which means Dumbledore knows Voldemort is here. Or suspects it. He knows, Harry said quietly. He thought about the Saturday meetings, the conversations about Riddle's psychology and Riddle's fears and the nature of his persistence. Dumbledore had been telling him about Voldemort's character with increasing honesty, but he hadn't mentioned that Voldemort was currently attached to a member of the teaching staff. Not directly. Not yet. Harry wasn't sure if that was oversight or another calculation. He wrote to Dumbledore that night. Not waiting for Saturday. A short, direct note: I believe you know that Professor Quirrell is being used as a vessel by Voldemort. I believe whatever is on the third-floor corridor was placed there in anticipation of this. I would like to discuss it. Tomorrow morning, if you're available. The response was on his pillow by midnight. Yes. My office. 7 a.m. Come alone. The 7 a.m. meeting lasted 2 hours. It was the most direct Dumbledore had been in all of their Saturdays combined, and Harry understood that this was what happened when you removed the scheduling and the preparation and gave someone a specific, undeniable question. The layer of management came down. Dumbledore told him about the Philosopher's Stone, what it was, why Flamel had agreed to let it be moved to Hogwarts, why Dumbledore had wanted it here and what trap he had laid around it. The traps are designed to be navigable, Harry said, when Dumbledore described them. Enough to stop someone acting alone impulsively but not to stop a determined, intelligent effort. Yes, Dumbledore said. They are designed to be solved. You want whoever comes for it to get through, Harry said slowly. You want to see who comes for it. Or what state they're in when they get there. I want to know what Quirinus has allowed himself to become, Dumbledore said, and the sadness in it was completely genuine. I want to understand how far it has progressed. And if it progresses all the way to the stone. There is a final protection, Dumbledore said. One that cannot be taken by someone who intends to use the stone for gain or power. It can only be retrieved by someone who wants it but doesn't want to use it. The Mirror of Erist, Harry said. He'd read about it, peripheral reference, barely a paragraph in one of the supplementary texts, but enough to recognize the concept when Dumbledore described it. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. You are relentless in your reading. What do I need to do? Harry said. Nothing yet, Dumbledore said. The situation is contained. Quirrell has not yet attempted to reach the stone, and when he does, he will be limited in what he can achieve without Voldemort having a body to use. He paused. However, I want you to understand the full picture now. Because I should have told you from the beginning, and I didn't, and the cost of that, he stopped. The cost of it is that I had to find it myself, Harry said. Which I did. So now we're here. Yes. Tell me about the other Horcruxes, Harry said. The second silence of the meeting was different from the first. Deeper. The kind of silence that arrives when a conversation has finally reached the question it was always building toward and both people in it know it. There are more, Dumbledore said. I know. The prophecy says he has to be vanquished, not just stopped or driven off. What we did 11 years ago drove him off. For it to be finished, completely finished, the Horcruxes have to be destroyed. Harry held Dumbledore's eyes. How many? I believe 6, Dumbledore said. Though I have certainty about only 2. The diary, I have long suspected, and the ring, which I found evidence of last year. Which means there are potentially 4 more, Harry said. Somewhere. Unidentified. Yes. Harry sat with that. The scale of it, not frightening exactly, not paralyzing, but genuinely large, the kind of large that required a moment to fully acknowledge before proceeding. 6 Horcruxes, a possessed defense professor, a stone in the basement, and a prophecy that said the end was his to bring. Right, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was close to awe, which Harry found slightly uncomfortable and tried not to show. I need you to teach me about each one as you identify them, Harry said. Their weaknesses. How they're destroyed. I need to know ahead of time, not after. He paused. And I need you to trust that knowing doesn't break me. I do trust that, Dumbledore said. It has become increasingly clear. Then we do this together, Harry said. Not me as the instrument you're aiming, and not me running off alone because I think I know better than you. Together. You have 60 years of knowledge I don't have. I have, he paused. I have the thing the prophecy says I have, whatever that turns out to mean. That's not nothing. It is very far from nothing, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded once and stood up. The Quirrell situation. If it escalates before the end of term, I will be here, Dumbledore said. I am always close when I appear to be away. Good. Harry picked up his cloak. Then he stopped. Dumbledore. Yes. When this is over, all of it, completely over, I want to know everything. The full history. Not just what you decide I'm ready for. Everything. He held the old man's gaze. I'm owed that. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the office windows and catching his white beard and the silver instruments on the shelves and Fox's plumage in its complicated gold. He looked very old in the morning light, and very tired, and completely present. Yes, he said. You are. The term ended on a Friday. The Great Hall was decorated for Christmas in the specific excess of a castle that had been doing this for 1,000 years and had not yet run out of enthusiasm for the project. 12 enormous Christmas trees, enchanted snow that fell from the enchanted ceiling, candles in their hundreds throwing light and warmth across the 4 tables. The students who were staying for the holidays, fewer than usual, the halls going to their relative quiet, had the particular relaxed energy of people who have put down their timetables for a fortnight. Harry was staying. It was not, in the way that previous Christmases had been, a depressing fact. He was staying because Hagrid had offered, and Ron was staying, and Hermione had considered her options and decided that the Hogwarts library during the holiday quiet was a resource she was not going to pass up. Neville was going home to his grandmother but had extracted a promise from Harry to write with anything significant. The hall was warm and noisy and full, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and a Hermione who was eating with one hand and reading with the other, and ate Christmas dinner in a large magical castle in Scotland with his friends, and felt the specific, unfamiliar weight of a feeling he had been working toward since October. Contentment. Actual, unqualified contentment, not the absence of difficulty, not the suspension of everything complicated, but the presence of good things solid enough to coexist with the complicated ones. He felt the rings on his fingers, warm and constant. He thought about Griphook in the deep chambers saying Lord Potter for the first time. About Hagrid on the water, uncertain and brave. About Bones and her handwritten postscript. About McGonagall's significant silences and Flitwick's visible delight. About Neville's face when Sprout gave him 10 points. About Ron saying you don't get to explain something to people and then tell them it's not their problem. About Hermione, who had started working on the problem before Harry had finished explaining it. About Dumbledore, saying yes, you are. About his parents, whose names he'd seen written in silver light above a stone basin, the first time he'd seen their names written anywhere that was meant for him to see. James Charles Potter. Lily Elara Potter. About the life debt contract they'd made freely, and what it meant that they'd trusted him to figure out the nature of the trying without writing it down for him. He thought about what it meant to be owed something. Not the money was useful and would be used, every vault and every property in its time. Not the titles, which were tools, levers in a system that responded to them. What he was owed was simpler and harder than any of that. The right to know. The right to choose. The right to walk into his own life with full information and full power and make his own decisions about what it was for. That was what the ledger had given him. Not gold. Not lordship rings. The ledger had looked at everything that had been done, and named it, and made it undeniable, and in making it undeniable it had given Harry back the one thing that 10 years of deliberate smallness had tried to take from him. The knowledge of what he was. Not the chosen one in the distant, prophetic sense, not the boy who lived as a fact of history, not the lightning bolt scar as an identity. Not those. But Harry. James Charles Potter's son, who flew like breathing. Lily Alara Potter's son, who went straight to the heart of any question within 30 seconds and didn't get distracted by anything else. Someone who paid attention. Someone who, when he found the door open, walked through it, not because he was told to, and not because he was afraid not to, but because walking through it was the thing that was true. That was the weight of what was owed. Not the numbers in the ledger. Not the seats on the Wisengamot. This, the simple, irreducible right to be completely himself, without bindings or throttles or careful management, at full capacity, in full knowledge, in full possession of everything that was his. He'd been getting it back, piece by piece, since a September morning when a giant man with an uneasy feeling in his chest had sat down across from a goblin in a deep stone room and said, "I need to see someone about an inheritance scan." The feast went on around him in its warm, loud, generous way, and Ron was talking about Chudley cannons with Fred Weasley across the table, and Hermione had finished her book and was now engaged in a spirited disagreement with George about whether transfiguration or charms was the more fundamentally important magical discipline, and Professor Flitwick was eating something very small with great enthusiasm, and somewhere above the enchanted ceiling the real sky was winter-dark and full of stars. Later that night Harry climbed the stairs to the dormitory and sat on the edge of his four-poster bed in the quiet, the other beds empty and dark, the fire in the corner gone to embers. He took out the 2 lordship rings and looked at them in the low light, not theatrically, not dramatically, just looked at them the way you look at things you want to fully see. Then he put them back on and lay down and looked at the curtains of his four-poster bed in a Hogwarts dormitory that was his, in a castle that recognized him every time he arrived, in a world he'd been owed access to since the moment he was born. His last thought before sleep was not about Voldemort or Horcruxes or Wisengamot procedure or the traps on the 3rd floor. It was about Hagrid, on the water, before dawn, rowing through the flat silver sea toward everything that was coming. The unease in his chest that had been a stone for 10 years, and the decision he'd made to do something about it. The whole world's ahead of ya, Harry. All of it. And it's yours. He believed it. That was the beginning. In his office at the top of the castle, Albus Dumbledore sat with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a quill he was not writing with, and the fire was low, and Fawkes was asleep on his perch for the first time in as long as Dumbledore could remember Fawkes sleeping. He thought about a boy who had walked into his office on a Saturday morning in October with a sealed ministry document under his arm and said, "You were wrong about me," without anger and without forgiveness and without any of the performed emotions that people brought to difficult conversations when they wanted the conversation to do something for them. Just the straight fact of it, offered clearly, like a door being held open and the invitation to walk through it being genuine. He thought about Rubeus Hagrid, who had been in his employ for 30 years and had followed every instruction with the devoted loyalty of someone who did not question the judgment of people he trusted, until, in the dark of a September morning, he'd quietly decided to question it. One decision. One inheritance scan. And the entire architecture of 11 years of careful construction had shifted on its foundations. He had been wrong. Not about everything. Not about the threat, not about the prophecy, not about the nature of what Tom Riddle had become. He had been right about all of those things with painful accuracy and at great personal cost. But he had been wrong about the boy. He had looked at Harry Potter and seen a variable in an equation and built accordingly, and the variable had turned out to be a person, specifically, a person with Lily Evans's ability to identify the heart of any question within 30 seconds, and James Potter's absolute physical confidence in his own body and its capabilities, and something that was entirely, specifically Harry's own, this clear-eyed, unperformative, completely grounded sense of what was real and what was owed and what the difference between those two things required. He had been trying to make Harry willing to die. What he had made, instead, was someone who was going to win. The distinction, sitting with it in the cold firelight of a December night, was the most important thing Albus Dumbledore had understood in a very long time. He picked up a fresh quill. He began, carefully and with full intent, to write everything he knew about Tom Riddle's Horcruxes, everything, not the selected portions, not the carefully managed disclosures. Everything, organized and complete, so that when Harry was ready for it, it was already there. It took him until 3 in the morning. When he finished, he set the pages down and looked at them. Then he wrote, on the top page, in his looping, careful hand, "For Harry." Who asked? He sealed it and put it in his desk drawer and went to bed, and the castle held its quiet around him, and in the Gryffindor dormitory 7 floors below, Harry Potter slept without dreaming, in a room that was his, in a life that was also his, finally and completely and without reservation his, taken back piece by piece from the careful architecture of other people's plans, built back up in its true shape from the foundation of a full inheritance scan and a giant's unease and a goblin's meticulous records and a boy who had learned, 11 years late and not a day too soon, that OK was the most powerful word in any language when you said it knowing exactly what you were agreeing to. The ledger had said it first. Harry had only made it true.